Hello, and welcome to Media-eval, a medieval pop culture podcast, where we talk about how medieval and medieval-inspired movies, TV, and books depict the medieval world. What did they get right? What did they get wrong? And what do they tell us about how modern people see the medieval past? I'm Sarah ifft, a medieval historian, and today I'll be talking about the anime series Berserk with Elaine Pauls.
Hello. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thanks for coming on. So do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and about why you suggested this particular piece of media to me?
Okay, yeah, I guess I'm just a notable internet weeb. So the thing about when it comes to anime in particular, and when we talk about the way that medieval times you can't even say medieval times when it comes to anime. Anime is just very, Japanese anime specifically, adopts a lot of weird medieval tropes that translate in a very particular and specific way, and Berserk is the most enunciated example of that. And I suggested Berserk because you're who wants to come on my show and talk about, and I was yes, bring me on to talk about an anime. But Berserk is also representative of not just medieval, but it's a very extreme example of anime in particular and what people think anime actually is. Mm-hmm. And to some extent they're right. And also Berserk, there's a lot to say. I mean, there's plenty of stuff that has already been said. This series has been going on for a million years and has been talked about to death. But I mean, not from feminist women. You know?
Yeah, there's a lot to say about this as a feminist and also as a medievalist.
Yeah. And also as somebody who really likes anime a lot, and I admitted to you before we started this that I am kind of a Berserk apologist because the manga is objectively beautiful. Mm-hmm. It's extremely well drawn and everything, but god damn it, there's so many tropes that are just laid out in the same way. I was talking to you earlier how my partner was I wish there wasn't as much rape in anime or Berserk. And I'm yes, this is where the tropes come from, is stuff like Berserk. Also, yeah, content warning for the entire episode.
Yeah, there is going to be a big content warning that will be in the show notes for rape, extreme violence.
Everything. Berserk is notoriously violent and intense.
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily against hyperviolence or the use of rape in some instances, but in a lot of instances in Berserk, it's unearned and gratuitous. Yeah. And that is a worse sin. Also, I'm here to learn. I'm excited to learn about what is right about Berserk talking medieval times.
There are things, I will say, that totally work for me in that regard.
Is it Guts' sword?
The sword is cool. It is not accurate, but it is cool.
Okay, thank you. I will concede on that. That is
the only thing that I have watched or been exposed to is the first season of the 2016-2017 arc, which apparently comes after a bunch of other stuff that was slightly less easy to access and that I have not seen.
Yeah, this is the Black Swordsman arc. It's the arc after the Golden Age. I'm already going to apologize because if you're listening to this because you found the hashtag Berserk or whatever, I'm not I'm an anime fan, but I am not a Berserk fan in the way that all of the Berserk nerds are. There is so much in Berserk to explain and unpack that is it is baffling to me that people can keep track of the series and keep track of all the characters and keep track of who says what and who does what because of how many insane things happen. So this series happens right after probably the most notorious part of the series, the eclipse, where Griffith sacrifices all of his friends and basically becomes an elder god. Yeah. And now Guts is running around searching for Casca.
Usually I kind of go through the cast of things. I have not heard of any of these people.
Is this the first time doing a foreign quote unquote foreign representation of medieval, or at least not a westernized version?
It's definitely the first non-Western.
Interesting. And also there's the anime level in that,
right?
And I'm sure Christianity comes into play a lot in medieval media representations of medieval times, right?
Yeah.
So anime is weird in that sense where Christianity is really strange in the way that Japanese animators use it, where they like to use a lot of symbolism and just pluck certain things out. Mm-hmm. And it is quite interesting it's similar into the way that we sort of orientalized Buddhism, all those kinds of religions. They do that too, to some instance, in Christianity. And this is a good example of that.
Yeah, although I will say there are ways in which I think it is better on medieval religion than a lot of things produced in Western, essentially Christian contexts.
Interesting.
Not in terms of the details of what's actually involved in Christianity, but in the sense that it's one of relatively few things in which people take religion seriously.
Oh, yeah, I know what you mean. Like the intensity of like some of the characters, how they consider themselves completely devoted to God, essentially, right? And like, I think that, would you say that, how is that different from like Western media depictions then?
So I feel like a lot of Western media depictions, first of all, feel the need to have a lot of characters who are like basically atheists plopped into the Middle Ages, because like, so that we can relate to them, that they're like atheists, or at least like very like 20th, 21st century style rationalists. Or there's like religion, but most of the people who are religious are very clearly like religious in quote marks and are really hypocritical. I think in some ways, like the way in which people relate to religion, it's obviously, they change a lot of the kind of details of what that religion is, but the way in which people relate to religion actually totally work for me.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Like how like the commander, she's just like straight up like 100% all for God, and she's not like a hypocrite about it either, right? Like when she finds herself sinning against Guts or whatever, she like starts thwapping herself as well, and all that kind of stuff. It speaks to like the level of intensity that the series is. I don't think like the writer, I can't remember his name, I don't think he necessarily made those characters because he's like, I want to be accurate with the medieval times. I think he made it because like the series is incredibly intense, and those characters really work well because they are extremely intense. Also, if you're listening to this and you're like trying to understand Berserk, you're not going to. I don't even understand Berserk, and I've seen it and read most of it, so just like strap in and enjoy it.
So is there anything that you know or want to say about any of the cast? Because I know nothing about them, and also I'm pretty sure I might butcher their names if I try to pronounce them.
So I know that several of them have been in a number of my personal favorite anime series. Like I think the guy who plays Serpico, I think he plays Jonathan Joestar in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which is my favorite, not just anime, but media ever made. And the thing about like when you get really weeby, you can start like understanding like identifying voice actors and everything. The thing I will say though is that when it comes to like Japanese voice actors versus like Western voice actors, they're much more respected, and they like have a lot more like, because a lot of media in Japan is through anime, and they tend to like develop like their voice acting a lot more. So there was another one who is in Mob Psycho, I can't remember, but they do like they do lots of different kinds of anime, but in general they're better voice actors than you would find in the West.
Right, which definitely makes a lot of sense, that it's like a prestige thing in a way that like it's not in the US, except insofar as there are like the certain kinds of Disney things, and it's just like we hire people who are like famous as in-person actors.
I don't know if it would be necessarily like prestige. Their craft is just much more developed. When you listen to a Japanese voice actor and then hear, I mean, this is also because like bringing over Japanese media to the West is quite difficult and it's not really respected. But like when you have like the English voice actor versus the Japanese voice actor is always going to be better and like have a much better like articulated sense of how the media should be portrayed and everything like that. So
the first kind of main segment is the enumeratio or recap section. So I'm going to start with just what I attempt to make a brief recap of the plot, and then we can get into general discussion. Okay, so bear with me for this one.
Yes, I will.
Guts, also known as the Black Swordsman, is seeking revenge against his former comrade in arms, Griffith, leader of the mercenary Band of the Hawk, who apparently, in a part of this that I have not seen, murdered all of his friends and raped Casca, who is Guts' girlfriend.
He also did that to ascend to like a god status. So he didn't do it just for funzos. Not that I'm defending him.
And then it's because of this situation situation that Guts has this weird brand thing that calls up demons.
Yes, so Griffith branded all of the members of the Hawk, and the theory is that he branded them in specific places that were like the most important to Griffith. So, for example, Guts's brand is on the back of his neck, which is to show that like Griffith valued Guts's loyalty, like he stuck his neck out for him, you know? So, but the brand's essentially though like means you're going to be calling demons to you constantly.
Yeah, so he's plagued by constant demons and also hunted by the Holy Iron Chain Knights, a military order associated with the Holy See, including their commander Farnese, who has a personal vendetta against Guts after he takes her hostage. He is accompanied by an elf named Puck and on and off a boy named Isidro who keeps following him. After Guts learns that Casca, who is under the care of a blacksmith that he knows from something, and that she is there because after her horrific experiences, her mind has been, as far as I can tell, completely destroyed. He finds out that she's disappeared and seeks her at the monastery of St. Albion. Meanwhile, the knights are also on their way there with the Inquisitor Father Mosgus. Casca ends up under the care of a very nice prostitute named Luca and another prostitute named Nina who kind of sucks. But thanks to her demon-attracting brand, because she's got one too, she is recognized as being a real witch and then becomes the priestess of a local group of heretics. This, however, is not actually a good thing, both because the heretics are the worst and because she then gets handed over to Mosgus, who is even more the worst. Casca's brand calls up what is like all of the demons, apparently, when she's about to be tortured, and Guts ends up fighting Mosgus and his Inquisitors, who apparently can grow wings and are actual God-sanctioned monsters in a very literal and not at all metaphorical sense. Guts, with a very small amount of help from his allies, which eventually include Farnese, who has a kind of crisis of faith, eventually manages to defeat Mosgus and the Inquisitors, and then hold out against these just huge amount of demons. However, there's this other whole thing with a demon which involves Griffith getting reborn and also getting a fun horned panther to ride on, which I assume is going to be a bad thing in the future. Guts leaves with Casca, followed by Puck and Isidro, as well as Farnese and Serpico, who are going to, I guess, just quit their jobs now and join him on his vengeance quest.
Yeah, that's, I'm actually very, very impressed at the amount that you could recall that, because it is quite complicated. And also, like, laying it out like that, I think if I didn't know like the previous things in Berserk, I would be like, what's happening right now?
Yeah, so there is some stuff that you told me and a couple of things that I like looked up after I finished watching it to try and get some other things to be put into place. There are also definitely like notes that I took notes as I was watching, but then there are definitely things that like I took notes on like what they were actually saying, which I found completely incomprehensible. And then things that happened like 3 episodes later, I'm like, oh, that's what that meant.
Yeah, and like, I will give respect to... So, I will say, by the way, this anime specifically is largely hated by most everyone because of like the style of like the 3D animation that they use. But, like, the anime isn't really hand-holding as well. Like, it assumes that you go in knowing basically everything, right? And if you don't know everything, you're gonna be very, very lost, I feel like.
Yeah.
I mean, at least the action scenes look cool, which is great. But, I mean, as somebody who considers himself, like, a casual Berserk fan, even I was like, I have no fucking idea what's happening half the time.
Yeah, I definitely like had a lot of moments where I have no clue what is happening. I felt like the more I watched, the more I at least could guess at what was supposed to be happening. It's
not like a casual engagement. Like, you have to really pay attention to like not just like what they're saying, but like a lot of unsaid things and like a lot of like, especially in the manga, they do a much better job of portraying like character motivations, not through like words but through action and things like that. Like a lot of people get very confused, for instance, about why Griffith just like killed all of his friends and stuff, but if you do pay attention to the character arc of Griffith, it does sort of make sense, or at least like the engagement, at least like it's like engaging because you're questioning why this character would do this and you're like trying to draw conclusions that way. And I will say the anime is accurate to the manga in that sense, as with this particular arc.
Okay. I have no idea what Griffith's motivations are, but I also haven't seen Griffith.
He's an asshole. That's really what it is.
So I'm kind of basically like, all right, so fuck that dude, moving on. I'm fine with the fact that the plan is to ultimately kill him, I guess.
Yeah, to some I actually don't even know if that's the plan. I think Guts wants to do it. I don't know about Casca.
Right, I mean Guts' plan.
Yeah.
I don't know about anyone else's plan.
Yeah, everyone else is just kind of like, oh, there's a guy who has ultimate powers or whatever, so.
Great. First episode is the Dragon Slayer. And my very first note is literally just, that certainly is a lot of corpses.
Yeah, they really start off like, they start you off like that you understand this is not a series about like pulling punches or anything like that.
Oh no.
Because I think one of the first scenes is Guts taking his giant ass fucking sword. And like when we say giant ass fucking sword, this is like preceding a lot of like Final Fantasy comically overlarge swords. And also a thing I really like about the anime is that the sword doesn't sound like a sword, it sounds like a hunk of metal. That he's like pulling through the air and just mowing down skeletons or actual demons.
I think they're demon skeletons.
Oh, okay, something like that.
My sense is that what happens. So we mentioned he has this brand, and we get to see the brand relatively soon. There's this whole bit where he like meets some priest on the road, and the priest has a daughter, which is weird from a medieval religion perspective. That's just normal, I guess. But then, you know, he's all like, oh, like, you know, I have like this brand and like I'm hunted by evil spirits. And they're like, evil spirits aren't real. And then of course, like immediately, I guess they like pass through a place where a bunch of people were killed and his brand like resurrects them, but as demons.
So wait, hold on. Go back a little bit. Priests wouldn't have kids because, like, chastity, right? Like...
Yeah.
Okay. So that was still a thing back then, as it is today, quote unquote.
As it is today in the Catholic Church, that's one of the changes with Protestant Church is that they got rid of the clerical celibacy rule.
Ah, okay. I'm Catholic, so also if you ever say something's canon, that's appropriating my Catholic culture.
True.
No, I'm joking. Please, by all means, appropriate all of Catholicism. It needs to die.
Another like gender-related thought that I have is that so you have the priest and his daughter. That girl gets killed real fast.
A lot of violence against women is used as motivation for male characters in the series of Berserk, which is indicative of a lot of other like uses of especially sexual violence, right?
Yeah.
And it's bad, folks. We don't like to see it.
Yeah.
Like, especially when it comes to Casca. So, Casca was, her mind, like you said, her mind is essentially broken from what happened before this.
Which is, like, that she was raped and also saw everyone she knew murdered.
Yes, exactly. And also at the time, which comes relevant later on, which I did read that you had questions about, she was pregnant at the time. And so since she was raped by Griffith, who is like, who essentially becomes this like demon overlord or whatever, she was pregnant with Guts' kid, but then the kid is like, quote unquote, tainted. So yes, this is an extremely disturbing series. And so like a lot of this like violence against women, and it does happen in anime a lot, where this violence against women and specifically rape is used as motivation for male characters. So a lot of the way that like Casca's rape is framed is in the sense that like it's very difficult for Guts to like come to terms with this and face revenge or whatever. And there's like and it's an easy scapegoat for the author to be like, oh yeah, Casca's mind is broken, so I don't have to really divulge into the character development of a woman who has been raped, right? Like, it's a very...
That's very much what it seems like.
Yeah, and that's very... I'm not, like, excusing this because I think it's wrong. This was still written in, like, the 90s, I want to say. So, I mean, they didn't have Twitter to cancel this guy. And I think it's lazy, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's bad and lazy.
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in.
It's a lot. The other two characters who are immediately get like incorporated into his entourage to varying degrees are Puck, who's an elf fairy thing, and then this kid, Isidro, who literally there's just like mercenaries in a tavern torturing them for fun.
Yeah. And I do like those characters, especially because they're very juxtaposition towards Guts, particularly, because Guts is like this huge power fantasy, which is a part of the reason it appeals to like Joker incels. Very dark, very twisted. Yeah. But they're kind of out of place. And also like the way that it's animated also makes it sort of out of place. But it's still appreciated. I do like, I can't stand anything that's way too serious, which is a part of the reason that Berserk is not like my favorite thing, among other things.
Aggressively serious.
Oh god, it's awful. And that's part of the reason it appeals to like all these incels and Joker and like guys online who are just like continually dissecting whatever the theology and themes of the series are. Like, this is not real life. No one is like this. Like, no one does not joke.
No.
And if you think that it is, you're having this weird power fantasy and you need to really check yourself and like go fucking watch a comedy or something.
Yeah. I simultaneously like had moments where like, you know, Guts like takes this like giant hunk of metal that is called a sword and immediately just like cuts 12 people in half. There are moments when that's very satisfying, but it is also simultaneously like this fantasy of masculine power and his like ultimate ability to protect all of these people, and especially women who can't protect themselves.
Absolutely. And like this is like a very extreme version. No, I wouldn't say it's really shonen. Shonen is a specific other genre of anime that I won't mention here. But it's like, it really is like a part of like this masculinity that they're portraying is like, I need to be taken seriously, and you need to understand how dark and cool I am. Because, like, the worst possible thing that you can be if you're this genre of toxic masculinity is to be laughed at, right? And, like, this is, like, an extreme manifestation of that, where, like, no one would dare laugh at Guts because he'd cut them in half and shit like that. And you're right, it is really satisfying, also from, like, a strictly action perspective, to watch Guts, like, fucking mow down a bunch of demons and things like that. But it's also just, like, I'm watching it and I'm just like, dude, where are the jokes? Like, just laugh.
Yeah, everyone takes themselves so seriously.
It's very eye-rolling.
The next episode, the Holy Iron Chain Knights, then brings in the Fancy Knights, who I think somebody mockingly refers to as the Spoiled Brat Knights, who are basically just this, like, fancy military order who want this, like, honorable position, but don't really know what they're doing, and then Guts cuts, like, 12 of them in half.
Yeah, because he's the ultimate warrior, right? So they have no training next to Guts. They haven't experienced the real world, Sarah. These are people who come from privilege. They haven't been on the streets like Guts.
And it's like simultaneously like, okay, I get there's kind of like a class thing, but on the other hand, dude, you gotta just kind of feel bad for them.
Yeah, they don't do class politics very well in Berserk at all, which is strange because when you look at like what is considered like a spiritual, not necessarily sister, like it really, I said this on Twitter before, I'm gonna make like three genres of people mad in this podcast: anime fans, Berserk fans, and Dark Souls fans. The one thing I will say though is that Dark Souls does have some okay class politics. I know like you haven't played Dark Souls, but essentially there's this idea, it's portraying this idea that like in the same way that neoliberalism is perpetuating itself despite it like destroying the world, there is that concept articulated in Dark Souls, in this idea of a painting being kept alive besides it, like, despite it, like, keeping the world burning and everyone suffering and everything like that. Dark Souls doesn't really have anything of that from my exposure to it. It could be different, though, because another thing about Dark Souls fans is they will shoe in literally any theory that you could ever think of at any point. You could take any imagery from Dark Souls and, like, of Berserk and, like, make up some wild-ass theory.
Yeah, it does not surprise me. Like, there's a lot of, like, imagery.
Yeah, and the imagery, that's, like, what has made the manga and the show, so I think that's where its legacy lies, is the imagery is really powerful, and the imagery is,
and it's really rich in a lot of ways.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's, like, the same as, like, specifically a lot of Japanese horror artists like Junji Ito understand how to make an image that is like in your brain, you understand it's wrong. And
Yeah.
they do a very, very good job of that in the manga. And that's why I say, like, the manga is beautiful and it's worth, like, looking at least. The themes, I'm not as confident that there's something to be salvaged there. So anyways, I keep getting distracted.
They eventually, I guess Farnese actually ends up managing to take Guts captive. And she then, like, pretty brutally tortures him. Like, she gets kind of more and more aggressive because I guess he mocks her faith at some point, which interestingly, she's like Christian, but specifically Christianity is like the worship of idols, which is a really interesting decision.
That goes back to the like idea of like the way Christianity specifically is portrayed in anime and Japanese anime and manga. Like, I'm speaking as somebody who grew up like Catholic and Christian, like, they have a sort of concept of it, but it is like fetishized in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah.
And like if especially like if you look at the way it's done in other anime, Evangelion is probably the best example of that, where it's just like crazy off the wall batshit imagery from Christianity with not like actual like we love Jesus stuff, like very Book of Revelations, like brimstone, fire, that kind of thing. And also like this torture scene again is just totally indicative of this power fantasy where like she tortures Guts in the worst way possible, but he can handle it, right? Like he's so
he's just,
tough,
like, totally fine. He then like I guess they like take him off somewhere, and she's like whipping herself because that's a thing that she does, and because of that she is like not super wearing a shirt.
Yeah.
And
I did mention this to Sarah before.
Yep. Then he, I guess, escapes. I think Puck helps him escape, and so then he takes her as a hostage so he can get away. She is still not wearing a shirt.
She doesn't for like 2 episodes, right?
Yeah, she will then through the entire next episode not have a shirt.
And like in good anime fashion, they don't have the nipples. Like you just see,
oh my God,
like,
that's so weird looking.
lumps, fat lumps on her chest that are like, they don't show nipples. They don't show, like, it's the same as like, I mean, don't watch hentai, but if you've ever seen hentai, they think like they can blank out everything by putting like a black bar over like the asshole, right? And like they think that like that will make people totally think it's G and totally acceptable and everything.
It's like, oh yeah, no, that's all.
Yeah.
So she's just like wandering around like with her like weird nippleless boobs for the entire following episode, Night of Miracles.
And like, I'm sorry, I keep going back to this, but like this is never utilized and like in Berserk, Berserk is horny. I will say this.
Yeah.
And this could be utilized in a good way if you were a smart writer and you thought of like, makes a woman in a very vulnerable position, in the position where she like hurt a man really bad and now he's captured her, and so like she's completely vulnerable, but that's like not really touched on at all. She's just kind of shown as like this shirtless woman who is around and crying a lot. Well, is she even crying? She's just scared and crying, right?
Yeah, and then I feel like there's also this kind of weird thing happening where she is his enemy, but that then it like the fact that he is not personally trying to rape her is like basically used as this like, look what a good guy he is.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's like,
yeah, which I hate almost as much as like the actual rape are these like, look, this man is like such a good guy, he's not a rapist. It's like, no, that's not a sign that you're a good guy. That's the lowest possible bar.
Yeah, exactly. Like, to clear that, you basically have to not do something, which is, like, the thing that bothers me the most, is it's like, if you're lazy, you clear that bar, really.
Yeah, it's like, he does not get a fucking cookie for not raping her.
And there's so many examples of that. Like, but, like, that, like, goes into the power fantasy, right? Where it's just, like, this man could if he wanted to, but he doesn't, which makes him even more powerful and more whatever. And like I think there is good elements of like Farnese and Casca. Like you obviously don't see Casca's character in this arc, but before this arc, Casca is quite a good, like, at least like somewhat of a good character who is like a strong woman who is kind of developed. And the use That's the problem I have. It's the use of these characters as opposed to like making them a part of the story. Casca's like rape is used to motivate Guts as opposed to like understanding where how that affects her and things like that.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm a Berserk apologist, but those are unforgivable things, which if you don't like this series, I completely understand why.
And there are things that I like about Farnese's character, especially like that she actually, and we'll get to it when we get to later episodes, like she actually has an arc.
Yeah, that's very true as well. And it's like, that's another thing about Berserk that's kind of like uncharacteristic is that like Casca and Farnese specifically, like a lot of other anime, they don't have like good characters who are women, and at least Farnese and Casca have like are interesting at the very least and have personality as opposed to just being like, I'm a woman who wears armor or something along those lines.
There's also a lot of world building demonology stuff in this episode, which I found cool, but also simultaneously a little incomprehensible. I love how he described the like source of the title, Night of Miracles, is that he describes the demons as miracles sent to the world by God because they're things that should not exist.
There's tons of like world building things like that where that's part of like what makes the fandom so nerdy is that they like completely dissect those kinds of things, and they dissect like the lore of the world and how like these demons are come to being, because like obviously the logic isn't based on like actual real world logic, it's based on like the demons come because they sense whatever and kind of things like that. And building that world, I get the appeal a lot, just like don't be too nerdy about it is all I have to say.
Yeah, the world building is definitely what I like best. He meets a thing that is called an apostle.
So apostle is what Griffith is now. So during the eclipse, Griffith essentially became an apostle, which means you're in the God Hand, which means you're basically a super demon. So you're like one of well, not Satan, because I don't think they really use the word Satan. I can't remember. They definitely use like witchcraft and stuff like that. But like essentially you're an agent of evil. Yeah. I think that they're called apostles, the God's Hand. This is another thing. This is why people are going to get so mad at me. There's so much lore that like I already have my brain filled with stands from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, okay? There's not a lot of room left in there. I can't handle more anime. Or I can, and I will.
We also learned that the apostle, like, ate somebody and then, like, put her head on the wall, so that's also a lot.
Yeah, there's tons of, like, throwaway violence like that, right?
Yes.
The thing about Berserk is, like, it gets close to the point of it, like, earning its violence. That's my thing with hyperviolence. I like hyperviolence personally, and I think it can be utilized in a really powerful and good way. If you want an anime that does do that, go watch Devilman, the recent version of it, and follow it all the way through. That is violence that, like, it has paid off. It totally earns it, in my opinion. But, like, this is, like, just gratuitous throwaway violence, especially against women, which I really hate.
There's also this, like, super gratuitous rape scene, or, like, attempted rape scene with this, like, demon horse who is trying to rape Farnese, who still is not wearing a fucking shirt, which means that we have to, like, watch the demon horse, like, licking between her boobs, and it's, like, the worst thing I've ever seen.
Just so listeners know, I was reading Sarah's notes, and, like, one thing she said was, like, can someone fucking get Farnese a shirt, please? And I was like, correct, yes.
I mean, because the notes that you saw also are my, like, adjusted notes that I, like, did the, like, consolidation of notes after I'd finished watching it. I think in my actual, like, in the moment notes, I wrote, like, 5 times, can somebody get her a fucking shirt?
That's the thing is, it's like, it's not earned for her to not have a shirt or something like that. And, like, just, like, I get it. Like, she's been, like, captured and, like, but, like, use that if you want to. Like, you can't just not have her have a shirt and, like, her paraded around or whatever. You have to, like, fucking acknowledge that she doesn't have a shirt on or something like that.
Right. And also it's like, they're trying to, you know, present Gus as this, like, good guy, obviously. It's like, He couldn't have fucking, like, thrown a cloak on top of
Yeah,
her?
absolutely. Or, like...
Which would have taken 2 minutes?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's very typical man, not thinking about that kind of thing, but...
But, like, he's just, like, dragging this woman around him as a hostage with, like, her, like, tits flopping around, and it's like, really?
Yeah, God.
This works for you?
Yeah, and like I said, I'm not gonna defend these kinds of things from Berserk. I will say, though, if you're a man and you like Berserk, you need to do some self-reflecting. Do I like it because of the world building and the art?
Yeah.
Or is that just an excuse for me to play out these violent power male fantasies in my head? Which is what a lot of Berserk fans do.
You know, and we were talking about this before we started recording, that, like, I sometimes take it as a bit of a red flag sometimes when I hear, like, guys are into medieval history, because a lot of the time it's, like, guys who are into medieval history basically for, like, their perceptions of the Middle Ages as violent, and also they are white supremacists. And so they see it as this, like, dominance of the white man.
Absolutely. And, like, I think, like, when people think of anime, like I was telling you earlier, my partner was like, I don't like anime because it's super rapey. And, like, this is a great, like, Berserk is, like, the pinnacle of, like, what people imagine when they talk about violence in anime. And they're completely right. Like, this is just, like, a method for, like, toxic masculinity to, like, form in a certain way. And while I don't fault the writer, because, like, get that out instead of, like, do other horrible shit or whatever, but, like, people who really subscribe to Berserk and they, like, look up to Guts as, like, a good character that needs to be emulated or things like that, that's when it becomes a problem.
Yeah.
You're right, in the same way that, like, a lot of people who, like, LARP medieval times or whatever, like, I know you're listening to this, Berserk fans, and you're like, no, I like the lore and I like the world building and everything, but, like, you need to, like, really recognize that maybe you don't. You need to be harshly critical of that shit, because, like I said, I think the world building and the animation and the manga is great. Not the animation in this, but, like, the manga is great. But, like, you need to, like, be like, Guts is a horrible character. As is most of the characters in the show.
The other, like, rape thing that I wanted to talk about is that, like, adding fucking insult to injury, Farnese then gets, like, possessed by a demon, and so is, like, straddling Guts, basically, I guess, until morning, and therefore the demons go away.
Yeah, so, like, that's the idea of just, like, every woman is horny for Guts. Like, Guts is a power fantasy. He doesn't have any characteristics outside of being, like, perpetually tortured, but the idea of him perpetually being tortured and then him, like, rising above it and being the ultimate powerful being or whatever, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, is very appealing, right?
Well, because all white men are perpetually tortured because their lives are very hard.
Yeah, exactly. Extremely difficult. I mean, it is kind of like, you know how, like, people, like, especially men, like to talk about, like, Twilight specifically, how, like, Bella doesn't really have a personality, but women like to put themselves in the position of Bella because then they're, like, dating some all-power. It's the same thing with, like, men have tons of these examples.
Oh,
like,
but they only talk about the women ones. And, you know, I find Twilight very frustrating because I feel like I hated Twilight, like, for feminist reasons. Yeah. And now I feel like I can't, like, hate on Twilight as much because hating Twilight has been appropriated by asshole men, and it makes me really angry. Man hate.
I am here for this. But, like, you're right. It's so hypocritical because men talk about constantly, like, oh, Twilight, blah, blah, blah. Like, Berserk, yeah, it has this world building and great art or whatever, but Guts is exactly the same thing as Bella. You can quote me on that and cyberbully me on Twitter for that.
Yeah, no, he does not have, like, a real arc or, like, character development, in this at least.
All of his character motivation, though, is based on violence that happens to women. Yeah. Which is bad, especially in this arc.
Yeah, and it sounds like he doesn't, like, change. He has, like, different, like, specific goals. Yeah. But, like, his personality remains completely the same. He's interacting with all of these other people that are, like, kind of being on his team, but he doesn't actually become more, like, caring or team-oriented. Yeah. He's just, like, occasionally deals with them when he has to.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he doesn't, like, interact very well with people, and, yeah. It's very dark, very twisted. Yeah. I'm gonna get bullied so bad from this, but I don't care.
The demons finally go away. Serpico shows up and finally gives Farnese a fucking shirt.
Also, I actually do like Serpico. He's kind of a cool character.
I mostly like Serpico.
Yeah, he's kind of a cool character, actually interesting, has weird motivation, and you're, like, not really sure where he stands with everything.
I kind of like Serpico. I have a couple of weird moments with Serpico, which I'm going to get to when we get to them, I guess.
Please go on, yes.
The next episode, Revelations, Guts has a vision of Casca being burned as a stake, so I guess there's more violence against this one particular woman that is going to be able to motivate him.
Also, speaking of Revelations, Book of Revelations, very much.
Oh my god, like, so much Book of Revelations.
Yeah.
Like, I actually skipped it, but there's a quote that's, like, right toward the beginning in episode 1. The Revelations say that when the sun dies 5 times, a red lake will appear to the west of the city with a name both new and old. It is proof that the 5th angel will alight. That angel is the Falcon of Darkness, the master of the sinful black sheep, the king of the blind white sheep, the one who shall call upon the world in age of darkness. That's not actually in the Book of Revelations, but it 100% could be in the Book of Revelations.
And that is also a reference to the eclipse, which happened before this series, where
right.
he becomes Fomento, essentially. And, like, yeah, you're right, though. Like, Book of Revelations is batshit. If you want to read something that, like, totally is blowing your mind outside of Dark Souls, just pick up the Book of Revelation. You can steal the Bible from any hotel. You can find it basically everywhere.
The last time I read the Book of Revelations was actually because when I was in grad school, the other medievalists and I developed what we called Medieval Latin Drinking Group, which was basically a Latin reading group, but we just, like, got very drunk and, like, started cracking up about Latin.
This is amazing and incredibly nerdy, and I'm into it.
So in particular, at some point we were reading the Book of Revelations, and just, like, I at least, like, went into just fits of uncontrollable giggles over the fact that there is something Jesus says that, at least in the Latin Vulgate, like, literally translates to, I know where you live.
Jesus does know where you live, just so everyone knows.
Book of Revelations, though, like, that's not even the craziest bit of the Book of Revelations. Everyone go read the Book of Revelations.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's very metal.
Revelations episode, he has this vision, so he goes to find Casca, and she, I guess, had been, like, plopped down while he's off revenging with this blacksmith and these 2 people that are hanging out with this blacksmith who are not his children, but who are, like, his pseudo-children.
There's some more shit about the blacksmith that I don't really understand. I think he's a character before this, but I totally forget.
Yeah, it is very clear that we're supposed to know who he is, and also that I think he built the sword and or Guts's, like, gun hand, which will become increasingly useful to him.
Oh yeah, we forgot that Guts has a hand that also shoots projectiles, like
yeah. So he has a prosthetic arm, which is just a gun.
And this is the thing. This is where, like, it starts redeeming itself for me. Is, like, Guts' like use of his gun hand and his sword is objectively cool. And
I really like the action sequences. And, like, I'm actually not opposed to graphic violence in things. I don't like specifically the sexual sexual violence and violence against women. But, like, I'm perfectly fine with seeing graphic violence. It doesn't necessarily bother me.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And the thing is, like, when it comes to sexual violence, it's specifically because it's overused and it's not done properly. And, like, I think maybe there is a place for it, but, like, everyone needs to take a break from it for, like, 20 years before we start actually having that discussion. Because it's constantly used as motivations for men, whereas it's like, this happened to a woman. Like, it didn't happen to this guy. Regardless of what you want to say. And, like, the violence in this show is, like, good. It's, like, well done. This is another reason that I think, like, anime will never ever work in live action, because when it comes to anime specifically, fight scenes and violence and things like that, it just has such a good way of, like, moving the camera around, so it just, like, you're like, it's so satisfying to watch Guts, like, mow down all these guys and things like that. So cool.
The Holy Iron Chain Knights, meanwhile, while Guts is finding out that, he finds out that Casca has disappeared, and he gets his, like, gun, arm, and sword fixed up, and then eventually goes off to find Casca at this monastery. Meanwhile, however, the Knights of the Holy Iron Chain are also on their way to this monastery, and they are accompanying Mosgus of the Bloody Bible and Inquisitor, who is described as having sentenced over 500 people to execution and killed more through torture. Great guy.
He also looks a lot like, this is an anime thing, if you've seen Full Metal Alchemist, he looks like the prophet at the beginning of it. I can't remember his name exactly, who uses the quote-unquote Philosopher's Stones. But anyways, like, this guy is fucked.
Yeah, and he, like, fucking, like, looks like he has been carved out of a rock. He, like, at some point he gets attacked by all of these villagers who are mad because he, like, murdered all of their families, I guess, and has, like, this, like, group of professional torturers that, like, pops on out, and then he, like, literally, I think, murders a dude with a book.
Yeah, he's also, like, a good example of how to make, like, a purely evil character, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like, he is a good character. I'm not saying, like, he acts good or anything, but he's a well-done character in the sense that, like, all of his motivations are purely evil from the sense of, like, a humanistic perspective, right?
Yeah.
But the way he sees it is he legitimately is like, this is, like, because I am a powerful being and because I have been blessed or some shit like that, right?
The other thing I find interesting about him, and this I'll talk about a little more later, Inquisition-wise, this part really is a mess from a medievalist perspective. But I do appreciate that Mosgus, too, is not actually hypocritical. Mm-hmm. He, like, genuinely has religious conviction and believes that everything he is doing is totally right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like, I think that's interesting.
Yeah, and they do a very good job of, like, making sure that they show that, like, the people who, like, religion is a motivating factor, is, like, a good...
Yeah.
Like, now that you've mentioned that to me, it makes a lot of sense that, like, the way a lot of Western medieval religion is, like, portrayed as, like, oh, religion is a second thought, my first thought is survival or whatever. Like, there's no, like, translation as like, religion is survival to these people. Like, if I don't appease a god, I'm going to fucking die, or things like that.
That matters to people, the idea that they believe that they might go to hell. Like, that is a motivating thing for people. Yeah. And I appreciated that.
It's very human.
He holds a, quote, simplified trial, which means no trial, for, like, 50 people who he then just immediately executes. So that's fun.
He executes them with the breaking wheel, right?
Yes.
That's
I'm
real,
talk about
right?
The breaking...
Okay, good. Okay, yeah. We'll talk about it.
We'll talk about the breaking wheel. He kills a lot of people. They also, I just want to make a note now, because I predicted something. They refer to a group of people called the Kushan, who they refer to as being their foes in religion, to which I immediately said, oh no, I know where that's going, and I was in fact right.
Those are the scarfed people, right?
The people who are just, like, the most unsubtle faux Arab Muslim dudes
I was just about to
ever.
be like coded ethnic, coded Muslim.
Yeah.
Similarly to, like, in Lord of the Rings, right? Where they bring in the... Yeah, exactly. Where it's just, like, the evil others. Or, like, 300, where it's just, like... Yeah. It's, like, a different version of evil Orientalism, essentially.
Exactly, yeah. Which also then is, like, weird from the perspective of a medieval universe. And it's, like, where are you that you have these, like, Muslim invaders?
Yeah, and, like...
in this, like, world that's, like, the 14th, 15th century?
It is interesting that they do that despite having, like, a very objectively evil Christian, quote-unquote, characters and things like that. Like...
Right, that you still need to bring in this just, like, unsubtly, like, evil, and you know, like, almost nothing about their motivations. Like, I think, like, a couple of them talk at some point, but, like...
And they're especially out of place in this world where, like, very Christian demons and deities, like, clearly exist, right? Like, where do these people come from? I'm sure, like, some berserk souls, some berserk nerd is gonna mansplain that to me later, and I'm not gonna care. I'm sorry to tell you this.
Like, from a world-building perspective, I'm mildly curious as to how they fit in, but it definitely was just one of those moments that they're like, the Kushan are foes in religion, and I'm like, fuck, there come the faux Arabs.
Yeah, and, like, I get, like, this was written at a different time and everything, but that doesn't mean it's not subject to the same kind of criticism that we should have now, especially when it comes to, like, portrayals of race. And before anyone starts telling me about how, like, but it's a Japanese anime or whatever, like, anime is fucked up about race, and I have a lot of things to say about that.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about that, but I always have found it, like, very interesting that pretty much every anime character I have ever seen, like, looks like a Western white person.
Yeah, so the thing is, like, okay, I'm a white person. I'll say this full on.
I am also a white
and
person.
I'm not Japanese, and I am very, like, westernized or whatever. But, like, Japanese anime and Japanese people in particular have no problems with doing things like blackface, just, like, straight up for funzos. And also, I mean, they have history of imperialism. So I don't think it's wrong to be critical of Japan specifically, especially when it comes to like colonialism, race, and like imperialism specifically. You have to do it very carefully and like under a lens of like I'm being exposed to this, but like it's not wrong for me to say like Japanese people doing blackface is wrong, like, and bad. And so like from in my perspective, the portrayal of what is clearly people from the Middle East or Muslim people in this kind of medium as like them just like straight up being an agent of chaos or like evil or whatever is problematic, without a doubt.
Yeah.
I'm not a scholar, by the way, anyone. I'm definitely gonna be canceled on Twitter, though. That's, like, my goal, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, this is, like, not the first thing in which I have, like, that I've watched in which I have complained about Orientalism, because, like, almost, it's, like, this is, like, it fits very well into the standard medieval tropes, in that in every medieval movie where they depict people from the Middle East, it is always either this, like, very, like, one kind of stereotypical, like, negative Orientalism about the evil Muslims, or it's this weird idealization of Muslims, but where they're essentially, like I guess there's, like, that trope of the, quote, magical Negro.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're saying.
And, like, you see that a lot with Muslim characters, some of whom are black and some of whom are, you know, are not in medieval media.
That's the thing about, like, when it comes to Japan specifically, is, like, they're not a nation that was colonized, and they're not a nation that was, like, against imperialism. So when you consume that media from Japan, specifically anime, you need to keep that in mind when it comes to racial relations.
Yeah. The next episode, we do then see the Kushans for the first time. We get this kid, Isidro, back, the kid from episode 1.
Yes.
Who is getting beat up again, but now he's, like, learned something, specifically how to poison people, I guess.
He's scrappy. I like him.
Yeah, I'm on board with him poisoning people. Like, that's actually, like, pretty... So basically, he has some food, although it turns out he's, like, hidden most of his food. But then, of course, the, like, marauding soldiers go after him to steal his food. But the, like, food that he had visible that they see is actually, like, poisoned with some kind of, like, sleeping drug, basically. Good idea, honestly.
It's refreshing to see the use of poison outside of, like, a Black Widow or something like that.
Right, that poison is, like, often very stereotypically presented as being a woman's weapon because, like, women don't have honor.
Well, okay, it is... okay, here's what I will say. It is presented as not having honor. However, it has historically been used as women. I would not say it's not having honor. I would more or less say it's you being smart and, like, them not being able to detect how you're killing someone or anything like that, right? Like,
also, it makes sense because both stereotypically but also in reality in various historical settings, women have control of food.
Yeah, exactly. So we're using our own domestic labor against men, essentially.
Exactly.
Also, women are just objectively better at crime. Like, I'll full on say that. Like, women will get caught less, and I know there's tons of meninists who are going to listen to this and be like, well, like, men are incarcerated more than women and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, because we're better at crime.
Yeah, exactly. We poison people and no one ever finds out.
Exactly. So this is actually a very feminist portrayal.
But it does, I will say, like, on the other hand, it is something that, like, historically there are a lot of women who are, like, accused of being poisoners if somebody close to them happens to die, and it's, like, very much like an anti-feminist accusation in a lot of contexts. Like,
oh yeah, I can't argue that women get killed over arbitrary shit a lot. Like, there's
and
no
it's, like, a
question.
way that, like, various, like, powerful historical women get vilified. So, like, Lucretia Borgia, who was the daughter of a pope who was bad at celibacy in the 15th century.
Bad at celibacy. Love to see it.
He had, like, 3 kids. Who, at least one of them, like Cesare, who was just, like, extremely terrible. And, but his daughter, Lucretia, like, I think a lot of people died that it might have been convenient for them to have died. And she is, like, accused of having poisoned them. And there's not really any evidence, but she's, like, presented as being this, like, mass murderer, basically, in some contexts.
Great.
Yeah. And also of having had an incestuous relationship with her brother, which, not great.
Yeah, no, don't like to see it.
No. So anyway, the kid like poisons these people and is about to get away, but then the Kushans arrive, who are indeed very unsubtle faux Arabs. But then Guts shows up and just immediately kills all of them.
Yeah, because he's like fundamentally in the right? And like there's no way that he's just gonna kill, or even if he does kill innocent people, they probably deserved it. Or something along those lines. He's also just, like, depicted as, like, very godlike. So, like, whatever, like, the justice of his sword does, like, you're just supposed to accept that.
Yeah. Puck then, like, steals all of Isidro's food, which I guess is fine, and he starts to follow them, and then we get to the monastery. This is our one, like, bit of, like, religious hypocrisy, I guess I would say, in that, like, everyone's clearly starving, and there's a monk who literally, I'm pretty sure at some point is, like, emptying like a half full plate of food out the window.
Oh yeah, I not vaguely, I do recall this. Like you said, there's not a lot of instances of religious hypocrisy in this, is there?
No, like this is, I would say, like the kind of only big one is like there's this kind of implication about the monks. And not that there wasn't religious hypocrisy ever in the Middle Ages or anything like that.
Obviously, yeah, obviously. But like it does take religion very seriously, and it does like it doesn't, like, no character here is acting because they're, like, atheists, like, hey, like, rubbing their paws together, like, religion isn't my ticket to money, or things like that. Like, they do truly believe.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and, like, you know, not that I think, like, Marx is wrong about the, like, religion is the opiate of the masses idea, but I also don't think it was being,
Sarah.
like... Like, not that I think he's wrong, but also, like, I think that that's, like, to some extent led to this idea that, like, religion is being deliberately wielded in that way, in a way that I think it was like, usually not quite that conscious.
That's actually, like, a very good, more articulate sense of religion is the opiate of the masses. It's the same way, like, how people think, like, conspiracy theories are like things that are intentionally used by the government to like mislead the public or whatever, but really it's just like, in reality, conspiracy theories are made where like incompetence sits, right? Like like there's a ton of like human action that is just unaccounted for, or things like that like lead to people thinking like, oh, this government has so much power over us and everything like that, and there's this overarching like world order. It's the same as religion. Like I actually do not think that most people who are seriously religious are delusional or utilizing that religion in a way that is like weaponized, right? Like I also have a lot of respect for people who are seriously religious, to be honest, because as somebody who is not religious, I just don't understand that level of that like commitment to theology and things like that, like, and so like I think like there's a lot of misunderstanding that like a lot of people like as in Berserk, they do a good job of showing that like Farnese specifically doesn't think she's acting like maliciously. Yeah. They do a good job of not showing like the hypocrisy in that sense. So
which I really appreciate. And like, you know, I'm not religious either, although I kind of grew up in a kind of more observant Jewish context and went to a Jewish high school, but like, and then like, you know, I still teach in Jewish studies, but like, especially like as somebody, like I study religion in a lot of ways, in part because like you can't study the Middle Ages without studying religion. And, like, it really bothers me when people kind of have this assumption that anyone in the medieval world is stupid or irrational because they are deeply religious, which, no, they're not. It is not incompatible to be both somebody who holds very deep faith and also to be an intelligent, thoughtful person.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's quite arrogant, in my opinion, to say that. And it is, like, very... It is like weaponizing like Marx's words to kind of say that in that context. Like to some extent, I do think that like religion under a capitalist like under neoliberalism is an opiate of the masses, especially in the way that Marx understood it. But like I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with like believing in God or being observant or like tradition or things like that. So I think you're right. You're touched on something that I didn't think of before this, that this has done a good job. This series does a good job of like really making religion intense and like intensely articulating how people were like dedicated and like were very serious about it. And they weren't acting religiously because of militia or anything like that. They were just acting because like that's like what they believe.
And honestly, like that's so rare in so much medieval media that like I really I have a lot of appreciation for this show because of that, even while also having a lot of critiques of it.
And it's weird because, like, specifically Christianity, in the way that it's depicted in anime, like I said, it's kind of fetishized in some sense, and it's, like, very misunderstood. They do a very good job of it also in Samurai Champloo. So Samurai Champloo, set in feudal Japan, a part of it is based on, like, the, like, small sect of Christians that lived in Japan and were persecuted at the time, and so they were, like, hiding, essentially, under the Japanese government, and, like, I was, like, first of all, as a Catholic, I was like, wait, what the fuck? Christians were ever persecuted ever? Like, when did this fucking happen? And
in America,
it was also
right now, Christians are persecuted.
Yeah, I know. We're, like, so persecuted, right? But it was also, like, super interesting to see that, like, they had to, like, go into hiding and shit, and, like, still, like, they're committed to their religion and other things like that. Like, most people are just like, oh, yeah, just, like, don't be religious, right? And it's like, no, that's not how it works.
Yeah. There is, however, a lot of torture starting in this episode being perpetrated by the monks / at the monastery. We get the good line, it is not only benevolence that God bestows upon the world, he is also a stern judge. And then we get the introduction of all of the prostitutes.
So, okay, here's my question about the torture when it comes to, like, specifically... You've read Discipline and Punish by Michel Foucault, obviously, right?
Parts of it, at least.
So at the beginning, there's this, like, very graphically depicted scene of violence, like, from medieval torture or whatever. I mean, medieval times were violent or whatever, but is it, like, fetishized, the violence in it?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, torture happened, and this is something I'm going to talk about in more detail when I actually talk about, like, I'm going to talk about the Inquisition in particular a bit later, like the actual Inquisition. Mm-hmm. Yes, there was torture, but it has a purpose. It's not just, like, for funsies.
Damn. I was hoping for funzos.
Like, there is, like, a point behind the torture, and it's also, like, very regulated.
Okay, so, like, probably, like, some kind of sociological perspective where it's, like, a group, like, bonding experience where everyone goes out and watches the torture or something like that, or it's, like...
Well, that it actually has, like, a legal purpose.
Oh,
in that
I see.
Essentially, it's often made, like, almost impossible to execute somebody without a confession.
So there's almost, like, it's not arbitrary in the way that we, like, perceive it, right?
Right, exactly. It's not just, like, I'm just going to torture this person because no matter what. It's that essentially, like, it's very difficult to actually kind of deem somebody ultimately guilty without them having actually confessed.
I see.
And so torture is considered acceptable as a means to obtain a confession, which obviously I'm not saying is, like, a good thing, but it's actually not a form of punishment. It's specifically a way to obtain what many people, I think, in fact, believed was therefore the truth.
Ah, I see. Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, so it's not just this pure sadism. And as I said, it's also, like, very well organized in that the reason we actually can tell a decent amount about medieval torture is because, like, you actually are legally obligated to record all of the details. Like, there is a notary sitting there whose job it is to say exactly what is done to a person that then ultimately will potentially elicit the confession.
That's really interesting. I didn't realize that it was, like, so meticulously wrote out or anything, like, which is probably why we know it now, which makes a lot of sense. But, like, the fact that they were, like, content with, like, writing it down and, like, meticulously documenting it, like, tells you everything that you need to know, that, like, it was an acceptable and, like, good part of society, right? In the same way that, like, we're, like, fine with, like, documenting how, like, well, not exactly the same way, but you know what I'm saying when we're talking about, like, the enormous amount of paperwork that comes to, like, when people are incarcerated or things like that.
Right, exactly. So, like, that obviously, yeah, torture is bad. I'm not saying that torture isn't bad, but that it's, like, presented as just this evidence of extreme violence and sadism, essentially, when, like, no, it's a thing that has a very specific function in the legal system, and it's not just happening for no reason.
I'm on the fence if torture is bad or not. I'm joking, obviously. But, you know, whatever happens.
We meet all of the prostitutes because the only job that women could possibly have is being prostitutes.
Is that accurate? Probably not, right?
No. No, that's like literally what I'm writing a book about.
That's actually really good. Like, there must have been an enormous amount of work that women did outside of prostitution. Well,
Yeah.
work that was probably unrecognized as work, like, which is why we have domestic, like, unpaid labor and things like that.
I mean, so there's obviously all of that, but it's also like women are like employed in like the textile industry, for example. Like and like women are like dominate the baking industry in Catalonia, and like on the side of like wealthy women, like you have a lot of women who are involved in commercial investment and money lending and real estate exploitation.
Not to mention that, like, I mean, I shouldn't even say prostitutes. Like, sex work is still valuable and like, but like at the time, there's definitely this perceived notion of what sex work is like.
Sex work is obviously serves a purpose, and sex work is work. And I don't mean to say that it's not, and there's great scholarship being done on medieval prostitution, which absolutely was a job that some women had. But it just always really irritates me that that's presented as like the only form of women's remunerated labor.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
As I said, and that's like literally what I'm writing a book about. So
that's very cool. You will have to send me a copy, please. I am very interested in this now. You know how I feel about labor.
In like 4 years when it goes through the academic publishing process and is actually like a physical book.
Yes.
The prostitutes rescue Casca, which by the way includes her being wrapped in bandages because otherwise she's going to immediately get raped.
Yeah.
And so you have to like hide her pretty face and pretend that she's like horribly disfigured.
Like some kind of leper so that like people don't touch her, some things like that.
Yeah. She, as you know, we've said before, like has the same like weird brand that Guts has. So you mentioned that his location is significant because it's on his neck, and that's like that he's like sticking his neck out. Isn't hers like on her boobs?
But hers is right over her heart. So like Griffith then owns her heart or whatever. Like he put it like on, but also that's like a big like fuck you that Griffith does to Guts specifically, and also to Casca. Like, so he puts it on the places that like essentially like he says like I own you essentially. So it goes, I know, it's really fucked up. And like I'm sure like some other Berserk nerd will have like a much more articulate version of that, but that is basically my understanding. She has the same brand that calls demons to her to some extent.
So she wakes up, whatever, all of these like demons who are like demons inhabiting the resurrected corpses of the people who died on the breaking wheel. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure exactly how it works in terms of the link between like the demons and the corpses, but at the very least the corpses are like good like places for demons to hang.
Yeah, I think so. I don't really know either.
That's how I was interpreting them, as like reanimated corpses who are being inhabited by demonic spirits. Mm-hmm. She then gets saved by this like weird demon fetus situation.
So that's the demon fetus. So like I said before, when Casca was raped by Griffith, who was in his like Femento skull, like Hawk King or whatever, she was pregnant with Guts's kid, and essentially when she was raped, the kid was like tainted or whatever.
Oh fuck, that's her kid?
Yeah, so that's like her demon child. Her and Guts's demon child that is coming around. That is what I think, I'm pretty sure. I know that
that's why it keeps helping her, because it's like her kid?
Well, like her little demon child or whatever.
I mean, her like fucked up kid, but like
yeah, that's essentially what it is. Yeah.
Oh, I hate it.
It's sort of a Witcher 3 thing. If you've never played that game, you don't play video games. There's a whole arc with something like that in Witcher 3. Again, I'm not defending it. It is good though, but it is fucked up.
Yeah. Guts gets help by this thing that's like basically like the Terminator Knight on like a ghost horse.
The Skull Knight, who is basically like Deus Ex Machina. So that's how Guts like survives the eclipse, essentially, is the Skull Knight shows up and is just basically like, I'll save you. And also he's like super powerful, has killed a lot of like apostles in the same, like, you know what Griffith is and all those like God Hand guys. He's killed a bunch of them, which makes him super powerful. Okay. He's also just like cool looking. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He's awesome. Like, I'm a fan.
Yeah, I like him a lot. He always has like cool wisdom and like a cool sword and everything. Yeah. The show should be about him. Really.
Oh yeah, definitely. he like gives Griffith, he gives Guts this warning, which I later then went back and successfully interpreted as meaning that the God Hand are using this monastery as the site of a ritual that will bring Griffith back to a corporeal form.
Mm-hmm.
This was not clear to me when I was watching, when I was just like, what the fuck is this dude saying?
It was barely clear to me, and I've read the manga. Like, it's very confusing, because, like, they use language like resurrect and all this kind of thing, and you're like, I don't really understand the consequences of them resurrecting something I don't understand, like Griffith.
And also, like, they never say, I don't think they mention Griffith by name.
No, they call him, like, Femento and, like, a million other names.
Yeah, and
like,
then there is just, like, it is happening like the same as before, and no one can prevent it. I'm like, what's happening?
So I don't necessarily think that this is bad, and I think this is part of where, like, the fandom makes sense to me, is it's, like, those kind of gaps, they, like, it's like piecing a puzzle together, and, like, everyone talks about it and everything like that. Like, what does this actually mean? And, like, later on it's explained, because when these chapters are coming out from the manga, it takes, like, months, and, like, this has been going on forever, and it's still happening in this manga. So I understand why that he writes it in this way, and I understand why it's compelling, but, like, as a passive viewer, I'm not gonna lie, I have zero attention span. And additionally, like, when I'm watching something, most of the time, I want it to just, like, wash over me. And, like, for me to really trust whatever the creator's decisions are. So, like, for example, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Something makes no sense, I just accept it, and then, like, it's awesome. Like, in this, though, like, something makes no sense, I'm supposed to, like, dissect it and, like, actively... That might make me a bad media consumer, but I don't care.
I mean, I'm up for some of that, like, kind of, like, work, especially in terms of, like, I'm a big fan of fantasy in general, and I'm really into world building. Like, I actually, I've been reading Wheel of Time recently, because Ollie, my former co-host, like, is, finally convinced me that it's time to read Wheel of Time.
The Blind Guardian album is based off of the Wheel of Time, right?
Oh, is it? I don't know. I'm trying to not, like, I'm not going to listen to it till later because I'm trying to not spoil myself, because I'm, like, on book 8 of, like, 14.
Holy shit, that's a lot.
It's, like, a lot of book.
Yeah, and I respect that kind of, like, vision for a series a lot, and I really enjoy it. I just think I might be a bad consumer of media. Also, fantasy is not, like, my normal game. So, like, anime is, but fantasy isn't.
Yeah.
My normal game is, like, basically 1970s sci-fi, like, resurrected in one way or another. Like, basically, I just like reading heavy metal from the 70s and 80s.
But I really like that, like, there's, like, all of this, like, world building that you have to dissect, and there's, like, stuff that you don't get that you'd have to, like, go back to actually figure out what was going on, which has happened to me, like, 12 times while I'm reading Wheel of Time, that, like, I'm, like, up to book, like, 6, and then Ollie's like, by the way, this is this thing that you missed in book 2, because it only makes sense after you've read book 6.
It makes you, like, it's smart, like, from a writer's perspective to keep people interested. It makes you feel like you're an archaeologist, like, as, like, a consumer, right? Like, you're going back and you're, like, dissecting through different things, which I guess makes sense because I'm a historian, right? Exactly. So that's, like, actually my job. I like historians a lot because, like, the common conception is that, like, history is, like, something that you can, like, objectively read or whatever, but I love all the little fights that historians get into all the time. Oh, right, because it's not actually, like, objective. Like, the claim of historical objectivity is very much, in a lot of ways, a false one. In a lot of ways, it's a very kind of, like, white Western male claim of, like, logic without biases, and and especially, like, that's something that came up especially when scholars started doing, like, women's history in the Middle Ages, and, like, things that are thinking critically about gender, things that are thinking critically about, like, queer studies or, like, race and ethnicity studies, that, like, oh, that's not objective history, with the claim then being made that, like, us as, like, white men only studying cishet white Christian men in the Middle Ages, like, that was objective history. Oh yeah, and that's, like, so indicative of how men view themselves as these, like, unlike these, like, third person, totally objective actors, and, like, their, like, tiny little man personalities have no conscience over their decision, even though they're, like, the whiniest little bitches in the whole world. Like, and you're right, like, that does totally shape. That's also why I really like history as well, like, as a pet project, obviously not as, like, you know, some scholar or whatever, but I do like reading history from, like, that perspective, that, like, this person wrote this under this perspective, I wonder what that means. It's also one of my, like, great moments with that was when I was an undergrad, actually, and
we had to do these like little like historiography papers, and there was one, this wasn't mine, so somebody else in the class was doing one where it was basically, okay, so scholar A says this about like the medieval German nobility. Scholar B says this. Scholar C says, who gives a shit what either Scholar A or Scholar B said? They're both definitely Nazis.
That was written about me, Scholar C, by the way.
It's just like, yeah, no, these people all have biases and they are creating a medieval world in a very particular way.
The epistemological scaffold, or whatever it's called.
Yeah, and like making choices about like what matters about medieval history from particularly this perspective.
Oh,
yeah.
You're making me like academia again, Sarah. Don't make me do this.
Only like some academics. I'll tell you later about medieval Twitter, and then that might make you hate academia again.
Oh, yes. I work in STEM, so, like, I know, like, I work in academia and STEM, so I'm just like, oh, God, I hate this all the time.
We then get to learn more about Mozges's Inquisitor buddies, who apparently are all, like, quote, I think this is the term that is used, deformed people, who are then, like, made into, like, murderers for the church. So, like, there's one dude who has, like, magic leprosy and, like, a 17th century plague mask.
Yeah.
And it's questionable, in addition to other questionable things in this show, that they basically set up this thing of, like, all of the, like, people with disabilities who are visible in this show are evil.
The main thing for me is it's like, I like we were talking about before, like, history is obviously written by, like, mostly white men and everything like that, like, and while we're getting, like, more perspective of, like, race and, like, gender in particular, like, disabilities, like, they're largely depicted as evil or completely weak, enabled people or anything like that. And, like, that cannot possibly be accurate. Like, maybe it's, like, largely one or the other, but, like, there is no way that is, like, the absolute encapsulating view of people who had disabilities at the time or whatever. Like, especially when I think about things like vision, like, I love thinking about living in the medieval times or whatever, like, as an average person. Like, understanding how, like, time would work is totally baffling to me. Like, because someone would say, like, okay, I need to meet you here at such and such a time. Because they would
by the church bells.
So, yeah, exactly. Like, how would those kinds of things work? And, like, now I think about it, like, if someone is, like, 10 minutes late, I'm like, where are you or whatever. But, like, how would you even have a concept of what 10 minutes would be at that time? And I understand time is, like, a very capitalist invention and is used to, like, monopolize our lives and everything like that. But, like, I think about things like glasses, too. Like, if you had severe astigmatism or something like that and you were living in medieval, like,
they come up with some kind of corrective lenses by I think the 14th century, but like not in this way that we have them now. So like it's that you could use that if you were, say, if you were a person who was actually literate and was reading, you could have like essentially something that's like a magnifying glass, but like they didn't have like glasses that you would wear all the time. And so like if you had like my eyesight where like I couldn't make out the facial features of a person sitting 2 feet away from me, then you would have a very rough time.
So the medieval depiction of you, though, like from Western media, would basically like be you, some like weird shaman who like had a hood over their head, and it would be like the blind woman will tell you what's going on in your future.
As I like peer very deeply into their eyes, because I have to be like we have to be like touching noses for me to be able to like see their face.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and like I really like thinking about like very mundane shit like that.
Yeah.
And like disabilities does come into that in some senses, because like there's lots of disabilities that are unseen, there's lots of disabilities that like you don't really understand how it impacts you like from day to day or whatever. Like it cannot possibly be true that they just like murdered every kid with a disability.
Oh no. And like, and disability studies actually is a growing field in medieval studies. I don't know a ton about it, but it is like a field that more and more work is being done, which I think is interesting. And there's also in particular, like, I mean, so this guy, as I said, has like weird magic leprosy, basically. Increasingly, people are talking about the fact that like leprosy still like allowed you to be in various ways productive, like member of society.
Well, they do that in Princess Mononoke too, right? Where like Lady Eboshi, like she has like a colony of lepers in her compound or whatever who make all of her guns and stuff. And like also that's part of the why it's my favorite movie is it's like these are not like bad people. They're workers who are employed by somebody who need this to survive, who are otherwise not going to be able to be employed or things like that. But they're still like agents of chaos in the way that they're like providing Lady Eboshi with like weapons of destruction and shit like that.
Right.
Like, and so like that's the kind of nuance that I would like to see. Not like this evil leper who is housed or whatever, or like even like a leper we're supposed to feel sorry for. Like, give me more nuance, please.
Right. So this is basically like, oh, we would have essentially like no option whatsoever if Father Mosgus hadn't like hired us to torture people. Mm-hmm. Is basically what happens with like all of the people who like visibly have disabilities in this movie.
That cannot possibly be true, right?
Or in this series. No, that definitely was not true. Yeah, and that's definitely not the reality in the medieval world. And yeah, so that is definitely a thing that like is frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, like, we're totally picking apart this or whatever, but I feel like this is what this podcast is about.
Yeah.
Just absolutely teasing it apart as much as possible.
Yeah. We also see that Father Moses' thing, apparently, is that he prostrates himself 1,000 times a day, which means he literally just throws his full weight onto the ground, which is intense.
He's a very intense man. There's several instances of him getting mad. I can't remember if it's in this season or the next season where, like, just veins, like, completely pop out of his face.
I hope it's this season because I hope he's really dead and doesn't come back next season.
Well,
damn it.
Lots of very interesting things happen to him next season.
Damn. Then we get the fun heretics.
Mm-hmm.
Nina is, I guess, one of them. Nina's one of the prostitutes who kind of sucks. And she decides to take her boyfriend, Joachim. I want to say Joachim. She keeps saying, like, Joachim. I don't know. I'm having, like, a rough time pronouncing his name.
We can just call him the Joker. If you want.
So she decides to take the Joker to her like heresy party, which is basically like a festival with a lot of naked dancing, and there's a thing called a great goat who's definitely like just like a dude with like wearing a goat head that you like do obeisance to, and some blood drinking. And so Joachim's supposed to like drink this bowl of like blood and organs, and then decides that, like, no. And so then Nina goes in, like, 3 seconds flat from deeply in love to, yeah, no, kill him, throw him off a cliff.
She's just going with whatever the party is, Sarah.
Yeah, which, like, Luca, the other, good prostitute, then sees, and she's, like, really annoyed about this, and then, like, spanks her, and it's like, I'm sorry, spanking is the punishment for you just killed a dude?
Yeah, that spanking shit is fucking weird. That's another thing that's, like, just, like, weirdly horny about Berserk.
It's so weird.
And like,
yeah, it just feels gratuitous.
The thing about like, especially with anime, like there's like horniness just injected in a lot of places, like where it's just not necessary. And like, folks, we do not need to be horny all the time. Not everything needs to be horny. Berserk does not need to be horny, in my opinion.
Speaking of how everyone's really fucking horny, then in like 3 seconds, the heretics like take off all of Casca's bandages, figure out that she's hot and not visibly deformed, and then immediately try to rape her until she like, I guess, summons a bunch of demons or something.
The demons must have just, like, felt like something was wrong. Well, they're still, like, attracted to her because of the brand, right? So, like, she always has, like, demons, like, same with, like, Guts, like, is always, like, fleeing from whatever things that
and it's also, I think it's, like, for any reason, like, a drop of blood touches the brand. That seems to be, like, an extra thing.
I think so. Some Berserk lore person will understand that
Anyways,
better.
there's like some demons that she like calls or subdues or something, so they decide that she's their priestess, which is, as we'll see, not necessarily a good thing either.
No, absolutely not.
No. We also see a bunch of heretics getting burned at the stake, which gets a very up-close and personal shot of a burning corpse, which was a choice. Farnese is like, yeah, I've been like lighting fires and like burning heretics personally since I was a child. And then Serpico like mentions this whole thing, and this is where I'm like a little like, I'm sorry about Serpico, that he reveals that his mother was burned as a heretic 3 years ago. That is not that long ago for him to now be personally burning heretics.
But also, like, it does tell you about Serpico, where, like, Serpico is weird. He's a character who's very out of place, where you can't really I don't really know his motivations. And like that kind of thing is something that I hear, like when I think about that, I'm just like, that sort of fits with Serpico in the sense that like I don't really know like what he's there for, and like he's like,
right,
it's like he's kind of like Tom Bombadil, where it seems like he's like plucked out of something else and like dropped in Berserk.
It's very weird. Isidro finally catches up with Guts, and I'm legit super proud of that kid.
Yeah, no kidding. I like him a lot. He's a good, he's a
too.
good scrappy boy. I see a lot of myself in him. That he's a fighter.
Yeah. Casca is like still like increasingly I am just so bothered by her just like sitting there and like being presented as this person who essentially like does not have a like functioning mind.
It's just like it's so wrong for them to do this thing to her like as a writer, and then like do this horrific thing to her and then completely rob her of any agency over herself. And like I know
she's put in a position where she can't have any agency for this entire series.
Absolutely.
Because of the like essentially the like the like way in which they write her as having responded to trauma.
And like also like I understand that like the writer is trying to make this like the most traumatic event possible, which like I get, and everyone responds to trauma differently or whatever, but like responsibly speaking, it's just like fucking super lazy, and it's like very ineffective for like, I mean, I get like this writer is not really being like, I need a woman audience to listen to Berserk or anything.
Yeah,
but like,
no, I don't think that's what they're looking for.
But it's like very... It's lazy and unreasonable, and like everyone responds to trauma differently. I understand that and everything, but completely robbing a woman of agency after she has been taken away her agency from being like thoroughly raped is like really bad, folks. It's not good.
Really bad.
And like having the only way her agency is going to be gotten back is like through some
man helping her.
Yeah, exactly. Like that. It's just like, and I know we keep talking about this or whatever, but it is a very prominent theme throughout this whole series, this whole part of Berserk, and like the whole motivation of Guts' character essentially. And Casca has no motivation now. Like you've robbed her of everything essentially, and you've done nothing to like really justify that choice. That choice, like it's just like she's just like a nothing. She's like a hollow character now.
Yeah, exactly. And then just like things happen upon her.
Absolutely.
And it's just so disturbing and upsetting.
And I understand, like, if you were to really emphasize, like, that's what rape is things happen upon you and you're robbed of choice and agency or whatever. But, like, that is not the purpose of that. The purpose of this is so that Guts has, like, character develop, like, some kind of motivation or whatever.
And that he can, and also that, like, he can do things without her interfering because she doesn't have the mental capacity to, like, interfere with any of the like things that are done to her.
Absolutely. And it sucks a lot because like Casca was not a character that was just like something that would let things happen to her before this. And like again, I get like how they're trying to say like this is how horrifying that this was with that this was like a total break of this character and everything like that, but like women are not necessarily inherently weak in this way, and like I don't think...
And obviously like as you said, everyone responds to trauma differently, but like many people do not, I mean most people do not respond to trauma in this way. Like I know many people who are survivors of sexual assault who are like amazing, strong, brilliant people.
Yeah, and like I just think it's like very lazy writing wise, and I think it's like very typical man writing wise to not think of like, okay, so I'm going to use this woman as an actor in whatever like plot that I have as opposed to like a person. Yeah, and it's very indicative of that. Again, this was written many years ago, but still should be subject to this kind of criticism.
Yeah. First, they just, like, throw jewelry at her because apparently the impoverished heretics can buy, like, a fuck ton of fancy jewelry, I guess. So then there's a whole thing. So there's Pepe, who's a different prostitute, gets arrested, and Luca goes to help her and then ends up running into Guts, who at some point then Luca and Guts, I guess, chat and realize that the woman she's calling Elaine and is the same as Casca, and they, you know, go...
Yeah, we forgot to mention that Casca was called Elaine up until this point, which is also my name. Which I'm just like, yes, Guts, talk about Elaine more. Very problematic, I know.
I guess just not knowing her name because she can't talk, Elaine is what Luca had happened to name her. Then they go back to find her and reunite her with Guts. Nina has, however, for reasons which are, like, not totally clear to me, decided, like, me and Casca are just gonna, like, take off now.
I wasn't super clear on that either.
She just likes running away from things.
Yeah, like, this
like,
series,
as a hobby.
I think, like, if I was to remember more and also pay attention more, it would make more sense, because, like I said, this series is good at, like, not being, like, too, like, logic, everyone needs to act in this certain way or whatever.
No.
Like, they do a good job of, like, making characters' motivations, like, irrational, like humans are. Maybe that was just, like, for plot device to, like, keep her away from Guts more, probably.
Yeah. Anyway, so they take off, and of course the heretics find them, and so then it turns out that the way they are going to honor Casca as her priestess is that the dude wearing the goat head mask is going to rape her, and also that they're going to cut out Nina's heart as a ritual sacrifice. So that's fun.
Yeah, and I, like, cannot possibly imagine, like, I'm sure, like, lots of women were raped during, as they are now, lots of women are raped, but it cannot be, like, a cornerstone of a man's identity, right? Like,
no, and it's also, like, this is my other just big thing about the Middle Ages. This is true of, I guess, both the violence aspect, but in particular, I think the rape aspect. I think there's something really insidious about the way in which rape is presented as an everyday norm in media about the Middle Ages in ways that it is not in media that takes place in the present.
Yeah.
And I think that is because they are attempting to try to disavow the reality of current rape culture by displacing it onto the past and presenting it as, look how bad it was back then, so obviously now it's better. When honestly, like, you know, I mean, like, the numbers are not here to say anything definitive, but, like, I would bet that the rates of rape are relatively constant.
And I think, like, it also comes down to, it's very insidious because it does, like, imply that there's something inherently natural about men raping women. They're like, oh yeah, let's look across all of time and, like, how much in the medieval ages, like, men would just constantly rape women all day, every day, and it's part of, like, being a man or things like that. And, like, it's very normalized to depict it in that way, but, like, it cannot possibly have been like that.
No, definitely not. Rape was absolutely, like, a bad thing.
Yeah.
Not that it didn't happen, like it happens now,
yeah.
But, like, it was a bad thing. It was not just, like, a normal accepted thing that, like, all men were just rapists all the time.
Yeah, that's really interesting now that I think about it. I didn't think about that before, how, like, it's just, like, so prolific in the depictions of, like, medieval culture or whatever. And, like, also as a woman, you're just, like, expected to be raped. I'm sure there's...
Yeah.
The most women at that time probably were like, I'm not going to be raped today or anything like that.
The same way that now most women don't think... I mean, we obviously, you know, I think there are ways in which, like, as a woman, you have, like, fears and anxieties because of the reality of rape culture. It would be great if we didn't have to live that way. And I'm sure that was also true in the medieval world, but it's not this just constant expectation that this is normal, which is how it's presented in this media. And so it reminds me, there's this book that came out a few years ago by Steve Pinker, who's, I guess, a psychologist, called The Better Angels of Our Nature.
Oh, yes, I've read that book, actually.
I haven't read it, but I read the journal issue, which was basically just historians fucking dunking on this book, because so his argument is that we've gotten less violent over time, and all of these historians are like, first of all, like, you're doing bad history, like, you are doing a bad job at representing the medieval world. And for example, for the Middle Ages, there's a scholar, Dan Smale at Harvard, who wrote one of these reviews, and he specifically comments on, like, he has, like, 3 citations. One of these 3 citations that talk about medieval things is by an actual scholar.
That's really interesting, because I remember reading that book in my undergrad and being like, this is kind of reactionary. And, like, also, like, the way that, like, the professor who I was with, like, presented it, where he's just like inherent biology, blah, blah, blah. Like, anytime someone says that, I'm just like, oh, God, no, please don't. And, like, that's kind of the way it was depicted. But
I think, like, the narrative of progress is bullshit.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Sarah. That progress always forward shit is fucking stupid.
Yeah.
And anyone who thinks that is, like, yeah, exactly. But if you think that, it's because you're, like, subscribed to the current paradigm of, like, oh, yeah, progressive, like, we're always moving forward, neoliberalist, capitalist bullshit. It's all wrong. Yeah.
Anyway, so that's, like, my particular, like, medievalist high horse is about that, is, like, not that I want to go, like, back in time and live in the Middle Ages and, like, idealize it, but also, no, we have not, like, unendingly moved forward. And, like, one of the things that I think is most depressing about the modern world is that there are so many continuities with the past, including the disparity between how much women make on average versus how much men make is actually about the same now as it is in 14th century England.
I mean, you're like, it's ridiculous how like this cognitive dissonance works, because I was thinking about this the other day and thinking about the Reagan administration in particular. Like, everyone's like, Trump, so stupid, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, like, there are so many parallels to the Reagan administration as there is to the Trump administration. I mean, obviously, there's like a much broader period of time, but still, like, Reagan is looked on like a hero to a lot of people. And in reality,
it upset me so much, the extent to which, when he died, people who at least call themselves, you know, who at least claim to be on the left, fucking participated in this hagiography of Reagan. And I'm like,
that's
no,
awful.
You hated Reagan. Reagan is terrible. The fact that he's dead does not make him less terrible.
Ronald Wilson Reagan is easily one of the worst people to ever exist in all time. And like people are laughing about Donald Trump and everything, and like, so I compare that to Ronald Reagan. Like, there is a lot of very similar things. Like, in particular, like, the cognitive ability is like very obviously not there with Trump as it was with Ronald Reagan. And so, like, I think people just like don't have a good idea of, they want to continually think that they're moving forward. It comes down to psychology. They want to continually think that they're moving forward and they're not stupid and they're better, but they might not necessarily be.
Exactly, and it makes sense that that's a book that's written by a psychologist and not a book that's written by a historian, because we know better.
Hell yeah. Sociology, historians, hating psychologists.
Yes, party.
Oh god, I hate psychologists.
Casca is gonna get raped by the Great Goat, but then Isidro, the kid, shows up and starts to distract the heretics, but then she wakes up some more demons, and this then involves the Great Goat, who up to then has been like just like a dude with like a goat head mask thing, gets like transformed into an actual like horrific goat-headed monster, who then gets like real fucking rapey real fast.
Yeah, of course, because
unsurprisingly,
because all men need to rape. Like, that's just inherent, right?
This is definitely, like, about the point where, like, I simultaneously got, like, very invested, but also very annoyed at how invested I was, because it felt like every episode I was like, fuck, I have to keep watching to make sure nobody, like, murders or rapes this poor, traumatized woman.
I feel the same. Like, and especially because knowing before and, like, being invested in Casca specifically, and also, like, they named her my name, which helps a lot, because I'm very narcissistic. I don't want them to kill this character, but like she's being threatened constantly, and I'm like, I should not be as invested as I am about the well-being of this character, but like, you're forcing me to be.
I know, and it's very frustrating. Guts does show up, I think, right at the end of the episode and like chops everything in half, which is very satisfying.
That's the problem. I keep getting fucked up by that, like, where it's like we said, we're like, please don't kill this character, please don't kill this character, and then Guts shows up and like just mows everything down in half, right? And like, that keeps you on the hook is the thing. Like,
and it's like that. It's very frustrating is that it's like this whole thing is like it's forcing her into this like damseled position, and it's terrible, and I don't like it, but also simultaneously, like, then Guts shows up and like saves her and cuts everything in half, and I'm like, yeah, exactly.
I feel 100% the same way, and I just like can't. They've got me.
And his battle with the goat dude is legitimately really cool, especially ending with the like, he has these grenade things apparently, which, like, you know, are not very medieval, but they're fun.
From his like gun fist, right?
Yeah, his gun fist also like produces like grenades.
So how he lost that arm also, by the way, so he gets the gun fist after he loses an arm. So during the eclipse, when Casca was raped, he had a demon bite on his arm, so he couldn't like get free. So he was watching Griffith rape Casca, and he cut off his own arm to try and get her. So, like, there's this whole savior thing, which is why he has a gun arm now.
Serpico then decides, in, like, the midst of there being, like, a ton of literal demons, that this is the really good time for him to, like, find Guts on a ledge and fight him.
Oh, yes, and Serpico, is this when he has the feather sword?
Yeah, and it is, like, simultaneously, like, it's really cool, and it's a cool sequence, and it's impressive, but also I'm just very much like, oh my god, there are bigger problems.
I know, that's the thing about Serpico, he doesn't act on logic.
And I'm just like, I just cannot with, like, you and your fucking, like, evil church situation, and I just, like, would like people to, like, deal with this demon thing.
That fight sequence is seriously so cool.
It is really cool.
It is like one of the coolest moments in the whole, like, that season.
Yeah, and it's also, I will say, I like that it does undermine Guts's, like, all-powerfulness.
Yeah.
In that he is presented up till now as being able to, like, essentially with ease fight anything automatically, and I really like that this guy who is presented as less traditionally masculine, or at least not this, like, certain kind of, like, essentially bulky masculinity.
And also Serpico is, like, very wild card. Like, Serpico is intentionally, you don't really know, like, what his motivations are and things like that. And so when it comes to this point in the series, you're like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, it makes sense to me but at the same time, I totally agree with you, where I'm just like, Serpico, stop!
Go fight a fucking demon.
Absolutely.
There are so many of them. Then it turns out that Joachim is not really dead, but he immediately gives up. Nina and Casca are now back together, and so he immediately gives them up to the Holy Iron Chain Knights. Isidro tries to save them by basically, like, jumping off a cliff awkwardly, and does not succeed, which is not surprising, and really the only surprising thing is that he does not break all of his bones. Nina's then taken to be interrogated by the Inquisition. Since I already have stated a number of times that I think Nina sucks, my last note on this episode is definitely just, Jesus Christ, don't fucking give her away. Which, of course, she immediately does. 5 seconds. Like, literally, I think they, like, break a nail. And she's like, yeah, no, Casca's the demon witch. Get her.
Yeah, absolutely. Just total traitor.
Fucking Nina. Mm-hmm. I will say, though, I'm not going to overall defend this show on its depictions of women, obviously. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a good point made on some episodes of the Bechdel cast that I've listened to, that there's something to be said for having more representation of, like, mediocre women.
Yeah, I do have to agree with you on that. Like, I really do respect any kind of show that does, like, a good job of, like, showing a woman who sucks. Yeah. And, like, is still, like, involved, not to bring everything back to anime, but this is also a part of the reason I really love Sailor Moon, is because Usagi objectively sucks. Mm-hmm. She's not a good friend. She's constantly late. She's really bad at school all the time. She's not smart or anything, but she's still, like, the main character, and the reason that, like, she is the main character is because she, like, makes so many friends, and, like, all of her friends help her and support her. And I think, like, it's very important to show women are not always going to be these, like, immensely powerful beings or anything like that. Like, it's okay for women to be weak. And I agree with you in that sense, but at the same time, you're right, where it's just, like, come the fuck on, when there's, like, such limited, like, actually, I'm kind of, like, torn, because, like, there is women, at least, in Berserk.
It actually passes, like, my test that I invented for this podcast, that there has to be at least one named woman that doesn't die.
Yeah, and, like, it does pass it, and also, I think it passes the Bechdel test, where women do have conversations not about men in that show.
Yeah, I think they do.
Which is very strange.
Yeah.
Considering. It's just, like, the entire plot of this arc revolves around redemption of a rape, which I do not know if I can get past.
No, absolutely not. So, like, on the whole, like, this show is, like, not getting a lot of brownie points on the representation of women. But that's the only thing I will say, is that, like, Nina sucks, but I think it's actually, like, important to have that kind of, like, mediocre female portrayal sometimes.
I completely agree with you.
Farnese is kind of annoyed because she's going to be, like, dragged off to the Holy See and doesn't want to be. Then we get the torture chamber scene, which I am not fond of. Especially with, like, Mozgus starts, like, ripping at Casca's clothing, so not on board.
It's gratuitous. Like, it's
this scene where, like, simultaneously there's not an actual, I don't think, serious threat of rape, but it feels rapey.
Yeah, because it's like, the violence is clearly sexual, right? And
it's
like,
sexualized in a way that it's not in all of the many scenes where we've seen men getting tortured.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. And like, men just do not have, like, they're using that kind of, like, because this was written by a man, they're using that, like, threat of violence in a way that's specific to women that they don't experience, right? And so they're using it as a narrative device as opposed to something that's, like, a real threat towards women. They really do not understand, like, the consequences of using that as a narrative device, and it's obvious in the writing, right?
Yeah.
And when I say gratuitous, I mean, like, the violence is not paid off, but, like, the threat of that violence or the actual violence like does not have the consequences that for me warrants that kind of choice narratively.
Yeah.
It's only used to like make it more salacious,
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
She gets popped into this like Iron Maiden, and then some like blood hanging out activates her brand. And then now there's a lot of reanimated corpse demons.
Mm-hmm.
And I am on board with the fact that they then just kill like all of the priests.
Yeah, I'm cool with it. I'm with it.
Guts shows up. And again, it's just like, on the one hand, he's clearly like right. He, clearly is like, the church is terrible. And he's like interacting with Farnese, who's like acting as a church representative. But still the way he like violently manhandles this woman to get her to like take him to the torture chamber is like not a great look.
It just speaks more volumes to like a lot of the things that happen in the series are questionable, in my opinion, to like at least it's interesting choices.
Yeah. There's a dude who I just totally forgot to mention, Jerome.
Oh, yeah.
He's like one of the Iron Chain Knights, and he's sleeping with Luca, and like, they sort of have a bond, I guess, whatever. He certainly seems to think they do. I will say, he kind of like wins in this scene for being like surprisingly chill about the fact that like his prostitute girlfriend calls him to like help an accused witch escape with the help of the Black Swordsman, who's like public enemy number one.
Yo, credit where it's due.
So like, yeah, credit where it's due for just being like super like, yeah, sure, whatever, hun.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, Jerome I feel like wins. Person who does not win, Mosgus, who takes Casca to burn her at the stake as a witch, and then he and his inquisitors just like sprout wings, and my notes in the moment were, wait, they have wings, the fuck are these weird angel monsters?
I think that's like indicative of a lot of things that happen in Berserk, like those three statements in order, where it's like, wait, the fuck, they have wings?
Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
The next episode, tellingly, is titled Hell's Angels, which is not wrong.
Yeah, no.
So you've got the angel things. You also have Luca does this whole thing where in the previous episode where they were like hanging out a window and she like sacrificed herself and let herself fall to save Nina, which is like a bad call. But she gets saved by the Terminator dude.
Skull Knight. Cool dude. He is very Terminator, you're right. He
looks like the Terminator.
He's also like Deus Ex Machina. Like he does show up a lot like when something like catastrophic is happening, but also like he's Deus Ex Machina in a way that is not like he's specifically supposed to be like a superior being.
Yeah. She then makes friends with what I personally described as a demon murder octopus. Who describes himself as the egg of the perfect world.
I believe that this is like the egg that, if I am not wrong, it was like the egg that turned from like this little red egg that Griffith had, I think, at one point.
That makes sense based on ensuing events.
This was like this little artifact that Griffith had when the eclipse happened that allowed him to essentially ascend to like this apostle, like godlike being.
Okay.
That like egg is like pretty legendary for like imagery and like Dark Souls and all this kind of thing. And also like it's just really fucked up to look at. There's so much conversation in the show around that like egg specifically and what like it means and all this imagery and like no one really super knows, which I think like is a good narrative device. Like no one really knows what it is and everything like that.
I was very intrigued by what was happening with the demon murder octopus.
Yeah. That's a good name for it, honestly.
It also has this thing that it describes as like its idol made of the skin and bones of priests, which looks basically like an awkward like coat made of faces, and it keeps saying I am no one, and I'm pretty sure George R. R. Martin stole this.
It would not surprise me if he did.
Guts defeats some of the monster angel situation things, but Mosgus gets away with Casca, who continues to be victimized, which is very irritating. The monastery gets like swallowed up by this apocalypse blood demon situation. And also now Mosgus can just like literally breathe fire.
He's like a weird demon dude, right? So like, I mean, he's not a demon. He's like
he's a like god demon.
Yeah, kind of, but like he just gets these weird powers. Or
it's not clear exactly how it all happened, to me at least. He and Guts are fighting and that's happening, and the people down below are all like very on board. There's like this whole like village that's now very on board with the like, yes, let's burn Casca at the stake and then this will save everything. We then get like a lot of cryptic commentary about how everything is following the same path as before. No man possesses the power to alter this festival's outcome, which I guess means that Griffith is getting resurrected. I don't know.
In some senses, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, Griffith gets the same kind of treatment that Guts does, where it's like, Guts is a villain. There's no doubt in my mind. I know he's like depicted as some kind of anti-hero or whatever, but like to some extent, he still is a villain. Griffith 100% is a villain, but everyone acts like this guy is so cool and like everything. Like, I want to be this guy, essentially. And that's kind of the same guy where it's just like, there is no one who is powerful enough to like defeat everything. But then Griffith shows up and they're like, there is someone powerful enough to defeat everything.
Yeah. The weird demon octopus egg thing eats the fetus demon?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm vaguely recalling this.
Which now feels even worse than it did before.
Yeah, because it's Guts and Casca's fetus baby.
Yeah, and like the demon egg monster is like Griffith's thing, and there's just like a lot happening that I'm like with that is like worse now.
The audience can't see it right now, but I'm basically doing the shrug emoji.
Yeah. Guts at first, it looks like he's defeated Mosgus, but then nope, Mosgus is just like made of rocks because the Bible made him that or something. I don't know.
He gets a million powers, essentially.
Yeah.
Like, he's so holy, he gets so many powers.
Yeah, including that like he does all these attacks that are like very like video game-esque in that he like announces what they're called as he's doing them.
The animation of this series of Berserk was heavily criticized because of like shit like that. Like, it does look like a video game because of like the 3D animation, and not just like the calling out, like the way that the camera angles move and everything like that. And in some instances I'm like, holy shit, this looks cool as fuck. In some instances it is like irredeemably bad.
Yeah.
I want to defend it, but I can't. I'm sorry.
Also, his fire breathing attack is called God's breath. And literally, he is just saying the English words, God's breath.
Yeah.
That's
pretty typical of anime. They do that with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, too. That's way better. Go watch that.
Okay.
It's not medieval. It's still really good.
But, you know, just like for fun.
Yeah.
Guts finally defeats Mosgus with his like grenade situations, and he does like there's like some fun like anti-religious quips. I think Mosgus, as he's dying, is like, let me take this heathen with me, and Guts goes, I'm going to pass. It's your time to shine with your god.
Also, the grenade situation is like the new name of my band, and also might make a podcast called that.
The grenade situation.
Yeah.
I like it. I'm on board. Good podcast. They then see that the fire of Mosgus's burning corpse is keeping the demons at bay, meaning that's the most helpful thing he has done for anyone in this entire last 10 episodes or whatever.
Yeah.
Guts then hands out torches so that his people can all last the nights against the demons. Farnese gradually is like having a change of heart about things because she finds Guts very reassuring now, I guess because he's not a literal actual fucking monster.
It's kind of a religious crisis though, right?
Yeah, it's like a crisis of faith that like she saw Mosgus as this like great holy man, and then she's like watching him essentially transform into a monster. Mm-hmm. And I think that actually is done well in some ways. Like I actually like her arc of like having this crisis of faith.
She is like not like I said, like, it's really complicated to talk about this show because she's not a bad character. And, like,
no.
They do things to her that are bad. It's the same with Casca. Casca is not a bad character. They do lots of things to Casca that are bad and reprehensible. But they are still making characters that are, like, ostensibly, like, real women or things like that. And like, so I have a very hard time articulating to people my criticisms of the show.
Yeah, as I said, I do like Farnese's arc. I think that there are good things about Luca and Nina. Casca, I will take your word for it that she was a good character before this.
Yeah, it's It's almost reprehensible.
Yeah. They're using the fire to keep the demons at bay, but then also the creepy egg turns into Griffith now, is a thing that happens.
Yeah, I don't really understand how the mechanics of this works, but I also think we're not supposed to understand it as, like, an audience.
No. Also, the fake Muslims show up.
Mm-hmm.
And are definitely being referred to as barbarians, which is a choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great.
Isidro does comment at this point, if we don't get out of here after all that, I'm calling bullshit, which is a very meta comment.
Yeah, exactly. That is good.
There's also a giant panther with horns that shows up, who is, I guess, named Zod and buddies with Griffith. This is not explained.
Several times, I think, that demon show. Well,
they're just like, hey, it's Zod. And then Zod goes over to Griffith, and Griffith pats him. And everyone's like, okay. And I'm like, okay. Then there's this whole thing where, like, Casca's trying to, like, get to Griffith, which I hate.
Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly if that's very articulated well or not. Like, I can't remember if she is legitimately trying to kill him or not. Like,
if that, then I'm okay with it. If it's anything else, I'm not.
I don't know. Again, I think the show is smart, not smart in doing, like, I don't think we really do know.
Yeah.
Because, like, we're not supposed to understand Casca's mind right now and, like, her motivations as a character when her mind is broken and everything like that.
Yeah.
I'm sure a much more invested fan would mansplain it to me, but don't.
They, I guess, just ditch that situation. Guts goes off with Casca, Puck, Isidro, and also Farneso and Serpico follow him because they've just decided that this is their thing now.
Yeah, he just, like, picks up a ragtag group of people.
Yeah, and then Nina just, like, ditches her people without telling them anything and goes off with Joachim inexplicably, which, like, is fine, but she sucks.
Yeah, she does kind of suck, actually.
I then wanted to kind of get into a little more detail about, like, things they got right and wrong.
Yes, please do. This is what I'm here for. I'm here to learn.
So in my next section, Vera et falso, or true and false. I'm going to start by highlighting some of the things that are no. For a show that is very into, like, medieval warfare, the armor is ridiculous.
It's, like, inaccurate or just, like, completely, like, out there?
It's, like, the 17th century.
Okay.
Is what it is. Is that, like, it's all, like, the whole, like, the universe in most ways feels like it's about the 14th or 15th century, and the armor is 100 to 300 years too late, essentially.
What was the armor like before then? Like,
it's just essentially, like, it's so much less ornamental, like the Holy Iron Chain Knights in particular. Like, their armor is, like, real fucking fancy. And it's, like, the kind of armor that you would wear at basically court settings in the city. Like, you would never wear that if you were actually going into battle.
So there was, like, video game armor then. I mean,
yeah.
That makes sense for them to do that from, like, an aesthetic perspective. But, like, don't overlap things.
They also did a lot of that with the architecture, that a lot of the buildings are, like, very much look like 16th, 17th century.
Was it, like, stone-based or... I'm curious because, like, the ornamentalness of it was, like, very, like, carving and, like, stone.
Yeah,
like...
so it's, like, stone-based. And, like, you know, most fancy buildings in both the Middle Ages and the early modern period are primarily stone buildings.
Right.
But there are, like, changes in the style and the way in which ornamentation is done in particular.
I see.
And they, like, move in, and, like, a lot of the buildings have this, like, kind of curly-Q based ornamentation, which is, like, very Baroque.
That's what I was thinking of. It's like the curvature shit. Like, that's not a very medieval thing, right? Like, medieval must be, like, very, like, straight edge, like...
Medieval architecture has a lot of, like, pointed arches, or earlier, like, rounded arches, but rounded in a very simple and less ornamental way.
Yes, I see what you mean.
That, like, it's all of these architectural stylings that are, like, 16th to 17th century is what they're doing on a lot of the buildings. The overall aesthetic often feels much later, and, you know, so that's a thing that I always tend to complain about.
I mean, I can't super blame them. I am also an idiot, so I would never know.
I mean, it's the kind of thing that I just every now and then I'm like, couldn't you read a book?
Yeah, you're right. Like, I can't really defend it because, like, it does take me 2 seconds to Google, like, medieval architecture. And, like, I could probably find, like, this is the wrong architecture and this is the right architecture in, like, 30 seconds.
Right, yeah. And so it's like, it just every now and then it's like, people just don't do that. And it's like, I wish they would. And that's like, there's like a lot of that in terms of the aesthetics of this.
Yeah, I think like, I think it's more like, I don't feel necessarily super offended by like the armor or that kind of thing. I do feel offended by the attitude though. Like we were talking about earlier, where it's like, all men want to rape all the time. Like that cannot possibly be fucking true.
Yeah, so that's like the other big thing that really bothers me is this like trope of like the Middle Ages as like very violent and of rape as being constant.
I'm sure the Middle Ages was violent.
Like it is violent, but also like in the 21st century in the United States, we have like a mass shooting every 2 weeks.
Yeah, and you literally have like concentration camps happening like in the US right now. Like it's to like say like one is more than the other is ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's like that's my thing is that yes, the Middle Ages was violent, violence happened, but it bothers me. I'm not against like hyper violence in this like in terms of like the aesthetics or like in terms of the experience of watching something, but it does annoy me as a trope that's specifically used in medieval media that like it's presented as this is just normal. And
also, yeah, you're right. And like you said, like it's insidious and it's very like problematic to present it as such, right?
Yeah.
Like it makes you feel like, oh, so I'm not as bad as this, which means that I can like continue to support this kind of violence or like perpetuate this kind of violence without like any kind of repercussions. Like, I think you're right that there is like a very strange thread of like normalcy of violence in doing that.
Yeah.
As difficult as that is for people to like parse together or whatever, like it's very psychology, which I know we hate, but like it is like it does set that seed in your mind that like that is kind of okay, you know?
Right. And it's also the other thing that I wanted to note about that is that like there are medieval critiques of violence and of like violence as a social ill. This is something that medieval people talked about. And that's the other thing that I feel like is very much absent from this and other medieval films.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and it acts as though just everybody assumed that this is just a fact of life.
Well, it's similar to like what we talk about religion, where like it's depicted that like everyone just thought like religion was like a fact of life as opposed to like a way of life, right? Like there is a disparity of really articulating what people were thinking at the time.
There's actually a great book called Tormented Voices by Thomas Bisson, who is my like academic grandfather. And she's like talking about peasant complaints about excessive violence from their lords.
Oh, hell yes.
Yeah. And it's like,
I love this.
And it's so interesting because it very much illustrates that like there are things that, I mean, there's like, because there's so much of a like naturalization of like, oh yeah, lords just killed their peasants all the time and everyone thought that was normal and fine. And this is such an illustration that no, it wasn't. That there are things that are considered to be beyond the pale that the peasants then like go and complain about as being a problem.
I like that a lot. We should be reading way more of that actually. Because like it is like, because like that like perpetuation of like the normalization of the peasants of the lord is the same way where people are just like, I mean, it's not exactly the same, but it is like people just being like, well, you have to rent, that's like a fact of life or whatever, or like people own land and that's like a fact of life. And then like it does really normalize it as opposed to us being like, no, we can complain all the time.
Right, yeah, and that like it's that like this thing like this is a thing that inspired complaints and critiques and eventually like actual peasant revolts, and which like they talked about things specifically that like I've talked about this before, but like in Catalonia in particular, the peasants' revolts in the 15th century referred to a set of practices that were called the mals usus, which literally means the bad customs.
Oh, peasant civil disobedience sounds very cool.
Yeah, but it's also like, it's so interesting because it's like they acknowledge that these are like long-standing customs, but they are like, no, these aren't okay. And the fact that they are long-standing customs and even that they are kind of norms doesn't make them okay. And again, I think like this is just an element that's so lacking in so much medieval media, the fact that there are contemporary critiques about violence as a force in society.
I think you're right. And also like it didn't really clue into me until we talked about it, like how like normalized that kind of violence is like very detrimental.
Yeah.
That's the main thing like I'm taking away from this is that like there was that dissonance. The fact that people were against that and like openly speaking against that in the medieval times and were like are like currently like completely non-represented and like to some extent rejected.
Yeah.
Speaks volumes about like the normalization of certain like violence and attitude and stuff like that. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of things that I would say are like in this sort of category. So first of all, the breaking wheel is actually a real thing, but it was usually a punishment used for murderers rather than for heretics.
Okay, and that's when they put them on the wheel and then they like break their limbs on the wheel, right?
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
The punishment that's usually used for heretics is burning at the stake. And I do appreciate that they got that right, because that they actually did have a lot of the heretics get burned, because usually there's this whole thing where they insist on like there being all these witches burned to the stake, and they do kind of allied witchcraft and heresy, but that witchcraft specifically is actually punished by hanging rather than burning.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, which is like very much not how it's depicted in most things. So I appreciated that specifically like the people who are called heretics get burned at the stake. The other thing I will say that it kind of got sort of right before I then go back to the like Inquisition stuff is the attitudes toward Farnese I think are kind of interesting, in that she's presented as being a woman who's the commander of this like knightly force. And while there's not anything quite like that in the medieval context, there are, however, women who, because of their position as noble women who are their father's heirs, that then like they become technically in charge of armed men, although they do not typically lead them into battle, but they are ultimately their lords, essentially. Mm-hmm. I do think it's interesting in that there is some amount, however, of people indicating that they don't take Farnese seriously because she is a woman.
Yeah, and that kind of like goes back to what we were talking about, where like the treatment of women in the series is very weird in particular, because like they're given agency, but they're not given agency. And like, I don't think that this is intentionally done, but like it is interesting to talk about how like they're creating these like actual women characters, but then like robbing them of agency and putting them in positions where they don't really have a lot of choice. It's very out of the norm, in my opinion, for things that are not just in anime, but like in most media in general, like especially from the time that this was written.
Yeah, and it's also like, it's honestly, I feel like really common in a lot of medieval media in particular, like it does a lot to deprive women of their agency to an extent that are there example, like multiple examples I can mention where women in films even seem to have less agency than like those real actual human women who are being depicted had in the Middle Ages.
Yeah, that's really weird, eh? It's normalizing like subjugation of women.
It is. And I think it's also like there's some amount of like basically, I know you talked about before the like, you know, giving men like a cookie for human decency. I think there's some amount of like giving us a cookie as modern society for like not for as like modern Western society for like not forcing women into marriages they hate or something like that.
Or like not making every woman be a prostitute. Or
exactly.
Like that.
Exactly. Yeah. So like I feel like there's a lot underlying in that. But I will say like the fact that she's this woman who on the one hand has power, but on the other hand is not always taken seriously, and that's clearly in part due to her gender. I think that there are real life examples in the Middle Ages that map onto that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Berserk is an interesting series.
The other thing that I wanted to then kind of talk about in more detail, and this is the kind of next segment, the Historia et Veritas, where I talk in a little bit more detail about a specific person or event or phenomenon, is that I actually especially wanted to talk about the Inquisition.
Yes, please do. I am here to learn, Sarah.
As I said, like, there's a lot that this show does in terms of taking religion seriously, including, by the way, like, as I said, like, there are all these people who are, like, not hypocritical about religion. That also includes, by the way, that the heretics take their faith quite seriously, which, while on the one hand, I have some issues with the heretics in that a lot of their actual practices are things that are kind of drawn from, like, 16th, 17th century accounts of witchcraft and devil worship.
Right.
But the idea that there are people who are, quote, heretics, but who take their faith seriously is very much something that I think you could legitimately say about a number of the groups who are at least tarred with the brand of heresy in the 13th and 14th centuries. So the Cathars and the Waldensians in particular are, I think, good examples of this, in that they are people who clearly like have a faith that they take seriously. That faith is just not actually in accordance with what the Catholic Church is saying it should be.
I see. So it's like minor branches of Christianity, or?
Yeah, just in a period where that's not actually an option. I mean, because the word Catholic actually means basically general or universal.
We're not.
No,
By
but
all
that's
means.
the claim that it's making. By the time that's actually adopted as a denominational category, it's overtly not true, because there are other kinds of Christians denominations.
I see.
It's making a claim about the church as being universal and about there essentially as being no possibility of being a Christian who is not part of the Catholic Church, even though that was never the case.
I see.
And so that's very much what you see in like the 13th and 14th century, and that's where the rise of the Inquisition comes from, is this idea that there are people who are practicing Christianity in a way that is different from what the church considers to be standard and acceptable, and that these are therefore heretics who have to be rooted out because essentially their presence within the body of Christendom is inherently damaging. It's presented almost as like a diseased organ.
Am I wrong to think that, because there's so many branches of Christianity in general, like especially throughout this time, am I wrong to think like the Catholicism just like happened to be the dominant one by like accident or something like that? Like it doesn't seem to me like that there's anything like very inherently different between like every branch of Christianity in some senses, especially in this time.
In the Middle Ages, it's very geographical.
Okay.
There are different geographical regions in which essentially different forms of Christianity who have some theological differences kind of arise as the dominant versions of Christianity. The big change really starts to happen so I would say about the kind of 13th and 14th centuries, you have these groups that arise that are coming up with different interpretations of Christianity in Western Europe, but that the church is able to stamp those out with some amount of effectiveness. And then the thing that's really striking about the Protestant Reformation is basically that like this is a challenge and a kind of alternative way of practicing Christianity that they then aren't successful in stamping out.
I see.
And the fact that they failed to stamp out Protestantism as essentially a minor heresy and to get rid of it is why we now, have a multiplication of Christian denominations in the Western world.
Damn Protestants. I mean, fuck.
And as a Jew, I can say, they're both terrible to the Jews, so.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We're all
like Martin
awful.
Luther had like 5 seconds where he was really nice to the Jews. And then he was like, wait, you're not going to convert? Fuck you.
That's my favorite meme is it's like, who would win, the entire Catholic Church or like one shit post, and Martin Luther just like nailing the post on the wall. Yeah. And that's the thing is like, I see like very minor differences. Like, I guess like from my own perspective and in hindsight that like, it's very interesting to see like the divergence and how that happens.
Yeah, and so like, but initially this is just something that like the church is really worried about as a problem. And especially like you have in southern France, this big dualist heresy that essentially believes that there's an equivalent evil power. They don't quite actually say Satan, but like that there's like the devil and God are equally strong. Mm-hmm. And also that they're much more anti-materialist in certain ways. They're actually even like more critical of sexual activity as being something that's like not possible to be a like good person essentially.
Oh, interesting.
But also embrace a kind of like radical poverty because owning material possessions is also seen as being like too connected to the material world.
Oh, damn. Like, I know we can't like touch on that too much, but radical poverty and like the transition of that into being a chosen wealthy person, especially in evangelicalism in the United States, is like unbelievably interesting that I would just like love to talk with you about that, but we can't get into that too much.
So another time,
too deep.
Yeah, so another time we should talk more about that. But for now, just one of the things that's really interesting is that you actually see the rise of orders within the Catholic Church who are embracing a kind of voluntary radical poverty, basically as a way of being people who can then talk to the heretics on their own terms, essentially, and like be respected by them in theory, or be respected by the people who are attracted by the heretics.
Fuck, it's like we're so far from that now.
Yeah.
Like we talk about how things are the same, but damn, that should have stuck, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Radical poverty should be a thing.
Yeah, so that's the origins of the Dominican and Franciscan orders, is that they, to varying degrees, of Franciscans in particular, are kind of embracing this. And then the point essentially of them is that these orders, and the Dominicans in particular, are basically intended to kind of target heretics. So a lot of the kind of inquisitors are Dominican or Franciscan friars. Mm-hmm. You then have these people who are getting sent out to talk to the heretics who, it actually is the case, there's something that like shows up a couple of times that like a lot of the people who are at least branded as heretics are people who are critical of the wealth of the church. And this is something that was in fact like a big issue, a hot button issue in the 13th and 14th centuries, and like going forward to some extent as well, like about whether it's okay for the church to have wealth, which it very much does.
We've totally resolved that too.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
There's no contentiousness about that at all now.
Oh, yeah. It's all fine. And so, like, that's something that then is being, that they're, like, trying to deal with. The other thing about the Inquisition, which I mentioned earlier, is that, like, first of all, there's torture, but, like, there are rules surrounding the torture. Like, everything is very highly regulated.
Yeah.
And also, like, he has this bit where he's like, let's have a simplified trial, which means, like, no trial. Like, that's not a thing. I'm not saying they were fair trials, but you have to have a trial.
There must have been, like, a semblance of logic, like, outside of, like, just... I'm very curious, because, like, we have a very specific kind of justice system now, right? Like, Commonwealth, like, restoration, that kind of thing, or whatever. But, like, they must have had, like, some kind of governing principles as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that would have based, like, how their trials work and everything like that. So, like, that's a very common misconception.
Yeah,
right?
That they have, like, a very clear logic-based judicial system. And as I was saying before, one of the issues with torture, and one of the reasons judicial torture actually becomes an important phenomenon, is because a conviction without a confession is nearly impossible.
That's really weird that you mentioned that, because now, like, our criminal justice system is so based on confessions. Like, like, GD, like, get the confession. That's very, very important to policing and, like, how we understand how, like, people are convicted now.
And that has medieval roots, I think. I mean, I think that's a way in which, like, the current Western legal system is actually the heir of a medieval legal system.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
That was in some ways a result of this emphasis on confessions, is that torture becomes considered to be an acceptable way to elicit a confession.
And I'm not, like, gonna be like, everyone who confesses is wrong, but, like, it also is, like, contributing to our misunderstanding of how people confess to things that they don't actually do in some senses.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. It's all GTC, get the confession.
Yeah, and so that's obviously the problem with, like, confessions under torture or other coercive contexts, which happens in modern policing as well. People eventually come to a point where they will say things that aren't true in order to get out of whatever, experience they're currently having.
So, like, that was, like, sufficient evidence, which makes sense to me, because now that's considered sufficient evidence. But then, like, the punishment was, like, literally punishment orientated, not, like, rehabilitation, quote unquote, which I know the United States is not based on, but, like, Canada supposedly is.
Well, that's actually the other thing that I would note, is that there's actually more, especially when you're talking about church heresy trials, there's actually more of a rehabilitation aspect than people tend to assume. So first of all, the church actually doesn't execute people themselves. If you're going to be executed, then you actually have to be handed over to the secular arm for punishment, because the church is not supposed to actually execute people themselves. And so typically what the church actually does when somebody is convicted of heresy for their first offense is more of a rehabilitation-focused thing, in that the sentencing involves things like fines, requirement of pilgrimage, public penance, which includes things like being whipped in public, and then things that would be a kind of social shaming in some ways, so that you would wear a yellow cross on your clothing, for example, and that this would be that, like, you would kind of go around and everyone would know you were a heretic.
The medieval version of being canceled,
I
assume, is what that is.
Yeah. There's very much this kind of theater around the punishment of heretics and creating a stigma against these people who are convicted as heretics, but it's something that, at least in theory, is accepting the possibility of rehabilitation, and that you might in fact become a, quote, good Christian. And then it's once you're getting into, like, the second offense that they basically decide that you have proven that you are not able to be rehabilitated.
I see.
Yeah.
Recidivism is a thing back then, too.
Right. I mean, so, obviously, like, not that that's a good system, but
no,
that, like,
if
it's your second offense, it's like, well, you're done. But that's the thing, is that, like, on the one hand, there is definitely some amount of, there are punishments that part of them is certainly intended as a deterrent upon other people, that you're supposed to witness these punishments, and then that's supposed to convince you to not do the thing.
Yeah, that's, like, in my opinion, not a very good, like, deterrent.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, a deterrent against crime doesn't work.
No.
I mean, I get the idea behind it, but there is just not a lot of statistical evidence that supports it.
Right, yeah. No, definitely not. It definitely, like, doesn't work, but it is at least, like, a logic behind something.
Yeah. I was also mostly just saying that because, like, there still is, like, a semblance of deterrent in
Yeah.
like our current criminal justice system, not just in the United States, but in Canada as well.
Yeah, they're definitely, I would say that's like a lot of the criminal justice system in the United States is really about like deterrent and punishment.
At least we don't have privatized prisons, but still
Yeah.
all cops are bad, including Mounties.
Yeah.
Cyberbully
And like
me on
very
Twitter,
little
I don't
actual
care.
like serious efforts being made toward rehabilitation. And, you know, I think
Yeah.
this is also a context in which it's certainly questionable how serious the efforts at rehabilitation were. Like, if there's, like, especially when there's so much, like, public embarrassment of the person, is that really conducive to that person repenting? And then also, of course, there's the question of the whole thing is, like, is it acceptable to ask somebody to essentially repent for what's basically, like, a thought crime?
Yeah. And additionally, like, not even just, like the social sacrifice versus, like, your actual punishment. Like, what are you asking people to do here? Like,
yeah. So one other thing that I wanted to say about the Inquisition was that the other issue is that, so there are definitely like real, like basically heretical movements. Like there's been some scholarship basically arguing that this group I mentioned before, the Cathars, didn't really exist and are essentially a creation of the Inquisition. And I don't personally buy that argument, although I think that the extent to which we can actually say things that are serious about their beliefs are limited because our records are mostly those produced by the Inquisition.
Yes, like we were talking about before.
Yeah, but I would say increasingly, though, like, basically you have a problem that is to some extent created, that you now have this Inquisition, which is this huge, like, bureaucracy and structure whose job it is to root out heresy. And then I think increasingly you are they're kind of creating a situation in which they're transforming basically people who are, say, for example, critical of the wealth of the church into full-scale heretical sects in ways that they probably really aren't. And that this is probably essentially kind of creates a culture that probably does to some extent make possible the Protestant Reformation and, you know, the rise of a kind of larger scale sentiment against the church.
I see what you mean.
And then, of course, also just like my one other quick note about the Inquisition, just because this is a very common misconception. What I've been talking about thus far is the Papal Inquisition. Many people, when they, so like under the jurisdiction of the Pope in Rome, many people, when they think of the Inquisition, they're actually talking about the Spanish Inquisition, which is obviously in Spain by definition. It is the Pope actually giving to Ferdinand, the King of Aragon, and Isabella, the Queen of Castile, who are married, and this is like why Spain is a country. But
it's so weird. They almost became two countries recently.
Yep.
Yeah.
I have many friends who are very much working for that.
Oh, really? We will talk about this another time.
We'll talk about this another time. Yeah, I have a lot of Catalan
my
stuff.
relatives are too.
He basically gives them the right to like run their own inquisition, specifically at this point for the purpose of rooting out people who have been forcibly converted to Christianity from Judaism and are like not being as actually Christian as they are now supposed to be.
Ah, I see.
And that's basically what the Spanish Inquisition is that it's then rooting out, again, still quote, heresy, but in this case, heresy specifically being defined as, the term is Judaization. So heresy specifically being defined as like basically continuing to practice Judaism after you've been converted to Christianity or encouraging other people to do so.
So this is also like a version of, like, not a version, but like most people think of anti-Semitism as like something that came from World War II, when in reality it's like very, very deeply rooted.
Oh,
like
yes.
This is a version of that.
I mean,
like,
anti-Semitism, or like, I tend to use the term anti-Judaism when I talk about the pre-modern period, because anti-Semitism, I think, has some like racial connotations that I don't think it initially had.
That's a good point, actually, because like also the way that it was framed through Nazi Germany specifically was very like, we can identify Jews just based on their physical like whatever. And
also that like Jewishness can't be wiped out by baptism. So like that's actually like the Catholic Church. Don't get me started on the Catholic Church during the Holocaust.
They changed a bunch of war criminals' names so that they could get out of Nazi Germany and like into Argentina, etc., and everything like that. Yeah. Because like you could legally do it when you were a part of the Catholic Church. Well,
and it's also that like to the extent that the Catholic Church like criticized the Holocaust, it was not actually that they complained about like genocide of Jews. It was that they were like, no, those people converted to Christianity. They're Christians. You shouldn't kill them.
Yeah, they're totally okay now, right?
And like, that's actually the thing, is that like not that like one is better than the other, but like there is like a difference between like an anti-Judaism that then believes that like Judaism can be wiped away through baptism and then you're no longer Jewish, versus this like racial, like, no matter what, you have Jewish blood that is like ruining you.
Yeah, I know. It's like, which one is better? Neither one.
Neither is good.
They're all bad.
Yeah, but that's definitely like a difference. And so like in most medieval contexts until about the late 14th century, I tend to say anti-Judaism versus anti-Semitism. It's also like so many of the tropes are the same, like the connection between like Judaism and like money and materialism, that goes back to the New Testament.
Yeah.
And it's something that like you see those stereotypes and the iconography surrounding it being developed over the course of the Middle Ages. And then that's like, there are images from Nazi Germany that are upsettingly similar to the ones that you see in the medieval world. And then every now and then some that you see like now that are basically the same trend.
I got in trouble once for saying that the New Testament was anti-Semitic.
Of course the New Testament is anti-Semitic.
Yeah, I got in trouble
anti-Jewish
for that.
At least. Yeah,
it was anti-Jewish, and I was like, yeah, of course it is. Like, everyone says that the Jews killed Jesus when Jesus was a Jew, but additionally, the Romans killed Jesus, and still, like, I got in a lot of trouble for saying that.
Our next segment, Fabula Nostra, is where we talk about an alternative piece of media that we might come up with in place of this. I didn't bother doing casting for this because like I don't want to get into a whitewashing thing, and I don't know voice actors well enough to like do that.
The thing about like, okay, so it would be very, very difficult to cast this, not just because of like the fact that it is a Japanese medium, but because like, in my opinion, anime cannot be live action.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah. Based on just how it's stylized, it just can't work. I think the closest would be Pacific Rim, which is like a very big homage to Evangelion.
Yeah.
But still like not the same thing always. So I think like casting someone as Guts and like casting someone as so-and-so is just like a total non-exercise. Like it would never work.
So I don't want to do that. So I just had a couple of remarks that I wanted to make about the version, the alternative like anime version of this even that I might want to see, which would be that like, as I've talked about before, like I really love the world building elements of this. Like I think this universe is great. There's just so much of the actual plot that's like really not.
And I do have to give credit to Dark Souls in that sense. Like Dark Souls does kind of a good job of that, where like it's not sexual at all, and like that removes a lot of like the cringiness for me about Berserk. And so like playing Dark Souls is the same as like watching Berserk. You know how like we were talking about how like the story is not telling itself to you? That's the same as Dark Souls. Like, and it works so well as a video game because you're moving throughout this world and you're like only seeing like there's no cutscenes in the game, and there's very little explaining things to you. You have to go throughout the game and like figure out the world on your own. And that's such a powerful like tool to like creating this world building and everything. And so I think like as a medium, as a video game, I think anime could possibly work that way as opposed to like casting someone or things like that, just based on the way that Berserk has translated to some extent to Dark Souls, Bloodborne, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and so I think like honestly like the thing that I would kind of want to watch would be something, and like I don't know if this kind of maps onto earlier parts at all, but like given that like Casca is someone who is clearly implied to have been herself like a warrior and like kind of a badass, the thing that I would have much preferred to see would be a thing where like Guts and Casca are actually like allies and equals.
They kind of are, from my understanding in the previous parts. They kind of are, and like I think that's kind of like the severity of how her mind breaks and everything like that. But like it would be much more powerful for her specifically to have like a redemption, not redemption, but like for us to like explore like how she translates this kind of trauma, as opposed to like this being a motivation for Guts.
Yeah, I think that like if you're going to keep the rape, then like that would be the version that I'd want to see. Or you could have just not had the rape and have them like both in a position where they're like I don't know, maybe even like they both have like been like branded and are trying to figure out what to do, and like both want to get revenge against Griffith because he like killed all these other people that they're friends with. Like I don't think you even need the rape.
I think like Griffith raping Casca, like I'm not saying blah blah blah, I defend this or whatever, but I think like it is a very powerful choice to make that in a narrative, and I think, but it was not redeemed properly. Like if you want to do that, like especially like building up the characters in this way, that's why like the Eclipse in Berserk is so legendary is because it's like so fucking violent, like considering that you've been with these characters for so long, but like building it up to the point where like this character essentially has zero agency afterwards is just not like, it's not a good use of narrative device.
Yeah.
In my opinion. Like, it could be so much more powerful.
Yeah, and I will say, like, there are exceptions, but I'm increasingly frustrated by, like, the use of rape as a narrative device at all.
Yeah.
And as I said, like, I don't even think you necessarily need it. Like, I think that you could have a story where they are both, like, trying to get revenge because, like, Griffith, like, fucked with them in, like, ways that are essentially similar.
Yeah.
That he, like, branded them with this thing that now, like, demons show up every 5 seconds, and, like, they had all of these friends that he murdered.
Yeah, and when I say the word gratuitous, like, because I've used it a number of times, like, I mostly mean that, like, the violence has not paid off. Yeah. Like, the violence of the eclipse is incredibly intense, and I think it's a very legendary and will go down in history as one of the, like, the most violent, like, hyper intense moments in anime and manga that, like, anyone has ever seen. Yeah. But, like, it's gratuitous because it doesn't pay off in the way that it should. Mm-hmm. Like, Casca completely losing agency is just not a good payoff. Yeah. Guts only being motivated by someone who is his comrade and, like, someone who he defended and, like, was a part of raping his baby mama, essentially, right. And then, like, causing her to, like, completely lose her mind and things, and then him being, like, strictly motivated on that sense and having no personality, that's not a payoff. Yeah. Like, it should have been, like, a much more holistic version of that. And, like, to use that violence in that sense is irresponsible as a writer and is irresponsible just, like, from a perspective of, like, my own audience. Like, I think it could be done in so much better ways and so much more interesting ways. Yeah. Stop using rape as a narrative device, people.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's basically it.
I still like Berserk. I'm just hypercritical of it because I am hypercritical of everything that I watch or listen to.
Yeah. That then leads into the next section, which is the estimatio, which is more or less Latin for rating. So I rate things on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the best, 1 being the worst. My criteria are essentially whatever I feel like them being for any given piece of media.
Same.
And are very much, like, feelings-based.
Oh, me too. Like, who isn't? Anyone who says they're not is a liar.
Yeah. I was definitely torn by this because I like things about the world building, because I like the fact that it actually takes religion seriously. But I think with the, like, excessive rape and also the ways in which I feel like this really builds on these tropes that really bother me about violence, and particularly sexual violence in the medieval world, I think I'm gonna go to 2 out of 5.
Yeah, I think, like, I'm more leaning towards, like, 3 out of 5 just because, like, I am an apologist and I've seen anime that's way worse, honestly. Like, not necessarily, like, more violent or anything, but, like, something that treats violence way, way worse. There is, like, some kind of subtlety in Berserk, at least. Yeah. There's also plenty of anime that's, like, doesn't have any kind of sexual violence in it that's, like, amazing. Yeah. Like, there's lots of anime like that, and, like, anime is a medium, not a genre. Yeah. All that kind of things. I mostly think, like, when I watch Berserk, I think, like, this could be amazing. Like, you've created this incredible world, and, like, you could do so much with this, but it just, like, really doesn't hit the mark in a lot of ways. I'm giving it, like, a 3 out of 5 on my own, like, objective. Like, 4 out of 5 from my own personal stance, because, like, I have, like, rooted, like, history with it and everything, but that's only just because, like, I enjoyed anime and that kind of thing. I think objectively it's, like, a 2 or 3 out of 5, though. Yeah. I think, like, if you really want to understand anime and you really want to understand like the translation of that to Western culture, Berserk is a good place to go. With
a lot of trigger warnings.
Oh yeah, totally. Like, trigger warning for everything.
I would say I would give, like, a qualified recommendation of this in some ways, that, like, with a lot of trigger warnings, I would say to some people that, like, this is an interesting depiction of the medieval world and of thinking about, like, how, like, the non-Western world then depicts the Western Middle Ages.
That's really good to think about, actually. You're right. It's a very qualified recommendation where it's like, if you want to see, like, interesting violence depicted in a way that isn't, like, Lord of the Rings or something like that, go and watch Berserk. And understanding how the world looks at Christianity outside of the Western world, which you don't really see a lot, go and watch Berserk.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy I finally found the time and got off my ass to get on here.
Where can Media-eval listeners find you on the internet?
Okay, so mostly on Twitter, notable internet weeb, at Heylaineys, HEYLAINEYS. I'm on a podcast about the very famous Canadian anime reboot called Format Guardian, and I'm also on my own podcast called Sports Are Gay, and I am sometimes on Alberta Advantage if you are into politics. Canadian politics. Albertan Canadian politics specifically, which I know like most of you are. Mostly just find me on Twitter. Yeah.
If you have enjoyed Media-eval, we can be found on all podcatching platforms. So please subscribe and please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and I will read 5-star reviews in future episodes. Please follow us as well on Twitter at the podcast at Media-eval Pod. That's MEDIAEVALPOD, and join the Facebook group. And you can also find me personally on Twitter at Sarah Ifdecker. And if you have any questions, please email me at media.evalpod@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to Media-eval. Bye.
Bye.